How to Write Clearly. Rules and Exercises on English Composition. By the Rev. Edwin Abbott, M.A., Headmaster of the City of London School. Illustration, Collegiate Regit. The author's copyright edition. Boston, Roberts Brothers. 1883. University Press, John Wilson and Son. Cambridge. Preface. Almost every English boy can be taught to write clearly, so far at least as clearness depends upon the arrangement of words. Force, elegance, and variety of style are more difficult to teach, and far more difficult to learn, but clear writing can be reduced to rules. To teach the art of writing clearly is the main object of these rules and exercises. Ambiguity may arise not only from bad arrangement, but also from other causes, from the misuse of single words, and from confused thought. These causes are not removable by definite rules, and therefore, though not neglected, are not prominently considered in this book. My object rather is to point out some few continually recurring causes of ambiguity, and to suggest definite remedies in each case. Speeches in Parliament, newspaper narratives and articles, and above all, resolutions at public meetings, furnish abundant instances of obscurity arising from the monotonous neglect of some dozen simple rules. The art of writing forcibly is, of course, a valuable acquisition, almost as valuable as the art of writing clearly. But forcible expression is not, like clear expression, a mere question of mechanism and of the manipulation of words. It is a much higher power, and implies much more. Writing clearly does not imply thinking clearly. A man may think and reason as obscurely as Dogberry himself, but he may, though it is not probable that he will, be able to write clearly for all that. Writing clearly, so far as arrangement of words is concerned, is a mere matter of adverbs, conjunctions, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs, placed and repeated according to definite rules. 1. Even obscure or illogical thought can be clearly expressed. Indeed, the transparent medium of clear writing is not least beneficial when it reveals the illogical nature of the meaning beneath it. On the other hand, if a man is to write forcibly, he must, to use a well-known illustration, describe Jerusalem as sown with salt, not as captured, and the Jews not as being subdued, but as almost exterminated by Titus. But what does this imply? It implies knowledge, and very often a great deal of knowledge, and it implies also a vivid imagination. The writer must have eyes to see the vivid side of everything, as well as words to describe what he sees. Hence forcible writing, and of course tasteful writing also, is far less a matter of rules than is clear writing, and hence, though forcible writing is exemplified in the exercises, clear writing occupies most of the space devoted to the rules. Boys who are studying Latin and Greek stand in especial need of help to enable them to write a long English sentence clearly. The periods of Thucydides and Cicero are not easily rendered into our idiom without some knowledge of the links that connect an English sentence. There is scarcely any better training, rhetorical as well as logical, than the task of construing Thucydides into genuine English. But the flat, vague, long-winded Greek English and Latin English imposture that is often tolerated in our examinations and is allowed to pass current for genuine English, diminishes instead of increasing the power that our pupils should possess over their native language. By getting marks at school and college for construing good Greek and Latin into bad English, our pupils systematically unlearn what they may have been allowed to pick up from Milton and from Shakespeare. I must acknowledge very large obligations to Professor Bain's treatise on English Composition and Rhetoric, and also to his English Grammar. I have not always been able to agree with Professor Bain as to matters of taste, but I find it difficult to express my admiration for the systematic thoroughness and suggestiveness of his book on composition. In particular, Professor Bain's rule on the use of that and which, see Rule 8, deserves to be better known. 2. The ambiguity produced by the confusion between these two forms of the relative is not a mere fiction of pedants, it is practically serious. Take, for instance, the following sentence, which appeared lately in one of our ablest weekly periodicals. There are a good many radical members in the House who cannot forgive the Prime Minister for being a Christian. 20 years hence, who is to say whether the meaning is, and they, i.e., all the radical members in the House, or There are a good many radical members of the House that cannot, and see. Professor Bain, apparently admitting no exceptions to his useful rule, amends many sentences in a manner that seems to me intolerably harsh. Therefore, while laying due stress on the utility of the rule, I have endeavored to point out and explain the exceptions. The rules are stated as briefly as possible, and are intended not so much for use by themselves as for reference while the pupil is working at the exercises. Consequently, there is no attempt to prove the rules by accumulations of examples. The few examples that are given not to prove, but to illustrate the rules. The exercises are intended to be written out and revised, as exercises usually are, but they may also be used for viva voce instruction. The books being shut, the pupils, with their written exercises before them, may be questioned as to the reasons for the several alterations they have made. Experienced teachers will not require any explanation of the arrangement, or rather non-arrangement of the exercises. They have been purposely mixed together unclassified to prevent the pupil from relying upon anything but his own common sense and industry, to show him what is the fault in each case, and how it is to be amended. Besides references to the rules, notes are attached to each sentence, so that the exercises ought not to present any difficulty to a painstaking boy of 12 or 13, provided he has first been fairly trained in English grammar. The continuous extracts present rather more difficulty, and are intended for boys somewhat older than those for whom the exercises are intended. The attempt to modernize and clarify, so to speak, the style of Burnet, Clarendon, and Bishop Butler, 3, may appear ambitious, and perhaps requires some explanation. My object has, of course, not been to improve upon the style of these authors, but to show how their meaning might be expressed more clearly in modern English. The charm of the style is necessarily lost, but if the loss is recognized both by teacher and pupil, there is nothing, in my opinion, to counterbalance the obvious utility of such exercises. Professor Bain speaks to the same effect. Frowny face 4. For in English exercise the matter should in some way or other be supplied, and the pupil disciplined in giving it expression. I know of no better method than to prescribe passages containing good matter, but in some respects imperfectly worded, to be amended according to the laws and the proprieties of style. Our older writers might be extensively, though not exclusively, drawn upon for this purpose. To some of the friends whose help has been already acknowledged in English Lessons for English People, I am indebted for further help in revising these pages. I desire to express especial obligations to the Rev. J. H. Lupton, late Fellow of St. John's College, Cambridge, and second Master of St. Paul's School, for copious and valuable suggestions, also to several of my colleagues at the City of London School, among whom I must mention in particular the Rev. A. R. Vardy, Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. Before electrotyping the fourth and revised edition, I wish to say one word as to the manner in which this book has been used by my highest class, as a collection of rules for reference in their construing lessons. In construing, from Thucydides especially, I have found rules 5, 30, 34, 36, 37, and 40_A_ of great use. The rules about metaphor and climax have also been useful in correcting faults of taste in their Latin and Greek compositions. I have hopes that, used in this way, this little book may be of service to the highest as well as to the middle classes of our schools. Footnotes 1. Punctuation is fully discussed in most English grammars, and is therefore referred to in this book only so far as is necessary to point out the slovenly fault of trusting too much to punctuation, and too little to arrangement. 2. Before meeting with Professor Bain's rule, I had shown that the difference between the relatives is generally observed by Shakespeare. See Shakespearean Grammar, paragraph 259. 3. Sir Archibald Alison stands on a very different footing. The extracts from this author are intended to exhibit the dangers of verbosity and exaggeration. 4. English Composition and Rhetoric, page 7. Page index of Rules 11 to 13, Rules 14 to 40, Short Exercises 41 to 63, Continuous Exercises, Clarendon 64 to 70, Burnet 70 to 73, Butler 74 to 75, Sir Archibald Alison 76 to 78. Index of Rules. I. clearness and force. Words. 1. Use words in their proper sense. 2. Avoid exaggerations. 3. Avoid useless circumlocution and fine writing. 4. Be careful in the use of not and any but only not or that. 4a. Be careful in the use of ambiguous words, e.g., certain. 5. Be careful in the use of he, it, they, these, and c. 6. Report a speech in the first person, where necessary to avoid ambiguity. 6a. Use the third person where the exact words of the speaker are not intended to be given. 6b. Omission of that in a speech in the third person. 7. When you use a participle implying when, while, though, or that, show clearly by the context what is implied. 8. When using the relative pronoun, use who or which, if the meaning is and he or and it, for he or for it. In other cases, use that, if euphony allows. Exceptions. 9. Do not use and which for which. 10. Equivalents for the relative: a. Participle or adjective, b. Infinitive, c. Whereby, whereto, and c. D. If a man, e. And he and this, and c. F. What, g. Omission of relative. 10a. Repeat the antecedent before the relative, where the non-repetition causes any ambiguity. See 38. 11. Use particular for general terms. Avoid abstract nouns. 11a. Avoid verbal nouns where verbs can be used. 12. Use particular persons instead of a class. 13. Use metaphor instead of literal statement. 14. Do not confuse metaphor. 14a. Do not mix metaphor with literal statement. 14b. Do not use poetic metaphor to illustrate a prosaic subject. Order of words in a sentence. 15. Emphatic words must stand in emphatic positions, i.e., for the most part, at the beginning or the end of the sentence. 15a. Unemphatic words must, as a rule, be kept from the end. Exceptions. 15b. An interrogation sometimes gives emphasis. 16. The subject, if unusually emphatic, should often be transferred from the beginning of the sentence. 17. The object is sometimes placed before the verb for emphasis. 18. Where several words are emphatic, make it clear which is the most emphatic. Emphasis can sometimes be given by adding an epithet, or an intensifying word. 19. Words should be as near as possible to the words with which they are grammatically connected. 20. Adverbs should be placed next to the words they are intended to qualify. 21. Only, the strict rule is that only should be placed before the word it affects. 22. When not only precedes, but also, see that each is followed by the same part of speech. 23. At least, always, and other adverbial adjuncts sometimes produce ambiguity. 24. Nouns should be placed near the nouns that they define. 25. Pronouns should follow the nouns to which they refer, without the intervention of any other noun. 26. Clauses that are grammatically connected should be kept as close together as possible. Avoid parentheses. But see 55. 27. In conditional sentences, the antecedent or if clauses must be kept distinct from the consequent clauses. 28. Dependent clauses preceded by that should be kept distinct from those that are independent. 29. Where there are several infinitives, those that are dependent on the same word must be kept distinct from those that are not. 30. The principle of suspense. 30a. It is a violation of the principle of suspense to introduce unexpectedly at the end of a long sentence some short and unemphatic clause beginning with a, not, b, which. 31. Suspense must not be excessive. 32. In a sentence with if, when, though, and c, put the if clause, antecedent, or protasis first. 33. Suspense is gained by placing a participle or adjective that qualifies the subject before the subject. 34. suspensive conjunctions, e.g., either, not only, on the one hand, and c. Add clearness. 35. Repeat the subject, where its omission would cause obscurity or ambiguity. 36. Repeat a preposition after an intervening conjunction, especially if a verb and an object also intervene. 37. Repeat conjunctions, auxiliary verbs, and pronominal adjectives. 37a. Repeat verbs after the conjunctions. Then, as, and see. 38. Repeat the subject, or some other emphatic word, or a summary of what has been said, if the sentence is so long that it is difficult to keep the thread of meaning unbroken. 39. Clearness is increased when the beginning of the sentence prepares the way for the middle, and the middle for the end, the whole forming a kind of ascent. This ascent is called climax. 40. When the thought is expected to ascend, but descends, feebleness, and sometimes confusion, is the result. The descent is called bathos. 40a. A new construction should not be introduced unexpectedly. 41. Antithesis adds force and often clearness. 42. Epigram. 43. Let each sentence have one, and only one, principal subject of thought. Avoid heterogeneous sentences. 44. The connection between different sentences must be kept up by adverbs used as conjunctions, or by means of some other connecting words at the beginning of the sentence. 45. The connection between two long sentences or paragraphs sometimes requires a short intervening sentence showing the transition of thought. 2. Brevity. 46. Metaphor is briefer than literal statement. 47. General terms are briefer though less forcible than particular terms. 47a. A phrase may sometimes be expressed by a word. 48. Participles may often be used as brief, though sometimes ambiguous, equivalents of phrases containing conjunctions and verbs. 49. Participles, adjectives, participial adjectives, and nouns may be used as equivalents for phrases containing the relative. 50. A statement may sometimes be briefly implied instead of being expressed at length. 51. Conjunctions may be omitted. Adverbs, e.g., very so. Exaggerated epithets, e.g., incalculable, unprecedented. 51a. The imperative may be used for if and see. 52. Apposition may be used so as to convert two sentences into one. 53. Condensation may be effected by not repeating 1. The common subject of several verbs, 2. The common object of several verbs or prepositions. 54. Tautology. Repeating what may be implied. 55. Parenthesis may be used with advantage to brevity. See 26. 56. Brevity often clashes with clearness. Let clearness be the first consideration. Clearness and force. Numbers in brackets refer to the rules. Words. Asterisk 1. Use words in their proper sense. Asterisk. Right, not. His apparent guilt justified his friends in disowning him. But his evident guilt. Conscious and aware. Unnatural and supernatural. Transpire and occur. Circumstance and event. Reverse and converse. Eliminate and illicit are often confused together. This rule forbids the use of the same word in different senses. It is in my power to refuse your request, and since I have power to do this, I may lawfully do it. Here the second power is used for authority. This rule also forbids the slovenly use of nice, awfully, delicious, glorious, and see 2. Asterisk 2. Avoid exaggerations. Asterisk. The boundless plains in the heart of the empire furnished inexhaustible supplies of corn that would have almost sufficed for twice the population. Here, inexhaustible is inconsistent with what follows. The words unprecedented, incalculable, very, and stupendous are often used in the same loose way. Asterisk 3. Avoid useless circumlocution and fine writing. Asterisk. Her Majesty here partook of lunch. Right. Lunched. Partook of implies sharing, and is incorrect as well as lengthy. So do not use apex for top, species for kind, individual for man, assist for help, and c. For. Be careful how you use the following words: not and any, only not or that. 5. And see below. Or any. I am not bound to receive any messenger that you send. Does this mean every, or a single? Use every or a single. Not one. I do not intend to help you, because you are my enemy, and c. ought to mean two. I intend not to help you, and my reason for not helping you is, because you are my enemy. But it is often wrongly used to mean three. I intend to help you, not because you are my enemy, but because you are poor, blind, and c. In the latter case, not ought to be separated from intend. By distinctly marking the limits to which the influence of not extends, the ambiguity may be removed. Only is often used ambiguously for alone. The rest help me to revenge myself. You only advise me to wait. This ought to mean, you only advise instead of helping. But in similar sentences, you only is often used for you alone. But see 21. Or, when or is preceded by a negative, as I do not want butter or honey. Or ought not, strictly speaking, to be used like and, nor like, nor. The strict use of not or would be as follows: you say you don't want both butter and honey, you want butter or honey. I, on the contrary, do not want butter or honey, I want them both. Practically, however, this meaning is so rare that I don't want butter or honey is regularly used for I want neither butter nor honey. But where there is the slightest danger of ambiguity, it is desirable to use nor. The same ambiguity attends not and. I do not see Thomas and John is commonly used for I see either Thomas nor John. But it might mean I do not see them both, I see only one of them. That, the different uses of that produce much ambiguity, e.g., I am so much surprised by this statement that I am desirous of resigning, that I scarcely know what reply to make. Here it is impossible to tell, till one has read past resigning, whether the first that depends upon so or statement. Right. The statement that I am desirous of resigning surprises me so much that I scarcely know, and see. 4a. Be careful in the use of ambiguous words, e.g., certain. Certain is often used for some, as in, independently of his earnings, he has a certain property, where the meaning might be unfailing. Under this head may be mentioned the double use of words, such as left, in the same form and sound, but different in meaning. Even where there is no obscurity, the juxtaposition of the same word twice used in two senses is inelegant, e.g., Bain. He turned to the left and left the room. I have known the following slovenly sentence misunderstood. Our object is that, with the aid of practice, we may sometime arrive at the point where we think eloquence in its most praiseworthy form to lie. To lie has been supposed to mean to deceive. 5. Be careful how you use he, it, they, these, and c. For which, c8. The ambiguity arising from the use of he applying to different persons is well known. He told his friend that if he did not feel better in half an hour, he thought he had better return. C6 for remedy. Much ambiguity is also caused by excessive use of such phrases as in this way, of this sort, and c. God, foreseeing the disorders of human nature, has given us certain passions and affections which arise from, or whose objects are, these disorders. Of this sort are fear, resentment, compassion. Repeat the noun. Among these passions and affections are fear and c. Two distinct uses of it may be noted. It, when referring to something that precedes, may be called retrospective, but when to something that follows, prospective. In avoid indiscriminate charity, it is a crime. It is retrospective. 6 in it is a crime to give indiscriminately. It is prospective. The prospective. It, if productive of ambiguity, can often be omitted by using the infinitive as a subject. To give indiscriminately is a crime. 6. Report a speech in the first, not the third person, when necessary to avoid ambiguity. Asterisk speeches in the third person afford a particular, though very common case, of the general ambiguity mentioned in 5. Instead of, he told his friend that if he did not feel better and see right, he said to his friend, if I or you don't feel better and see 6a. Sometimes, where the writer cannot know the exact words, or where the exact words are unimportant, or lengthy and uninteresting, the third person is preferable. Thus, where Essex is asking Sir Robert Cecil that Francis Bacon may be appointed Attorney General, the dialogue is, as it almost always is in Lord Macaulay's writings, in the first person, except where it becomes tedious and uninteresting so as to require condensation, and then it drops into the third person. Sir Robert had nothing to say but that he thought his own abilities equal to the place which he hoped to obtain, and that his father's long services deserved such a mark of gratitude from the Queen. 6b. Omission of that, in a speech reported in the third person. Even when a speech is reported in the third person, that need not always be inserted before the dependent verb. Thus, instead of, he said that he took it ill that his promises were not believed, we may write, he took it ill, he said that, and see. This gives a little more life, and sometimes more clearness also. 7. When you use a participle, as walking, implying when, while, though, that, make it clear by the context what is implied. Republics, in the first instance, are never desired for their own sakes. I do not think they will finally be desired at all, unaccompanied by courtly graces and good breeding. Here there is a little doubt whether the meaning is, since they are, or, if they are, unaccompanied. That or when men walking that walk, or when they walk on ice sometimes fall. It is better to use men walking to mean men when they walk, if the relative is meant to use men that walk, instead of the participle. 1. While he was walking on the road, he fell. 2. Because he was to the ice. When the participle precedes the subject, it generally implies a cause. Seeing this, he retired. Otherwise, it generally has its proper participial meaning, e.g., he retired, keeping his face towards us. If there is any ambiguity, write on seeing, at the same time, or while keeping. 1. Though he was 1, he nevertheless stood his ground. 2. Since he was struck with terror, 2, he rapidly retreated. 3. If he is 3, he will soon retreat. 8. When using the relative pronoun, use who and which, where the meaning is and he, it, and see, for he, it, and see. In other cases, use that, if euphony allows. I heard this from the inspector, who and he heard it from the guard that traveled with the train. Fetch me all the books that lie on the table, and also the pamphlets, which, and these you will find on the floor. An adherence to this rule would remove much ambiguity. Thus, there was a public house next door, which was a great nuisance, means, and this, i.e., the fact of its being next door, was a great nuisance. Whereas that would have meant, next door was a public house that, i.e., the public house, was a great nuisance. Who, which, and see, introduce a new fact about the antecedent, whereas that introduces something without which the antecedent is incomplete or undefined. Thus, in the first example above, inspector is complete in itself, and who introduces a new fact about him, guard, is incomplete, and requires that traveled with the train to complete the meaning. It is not, and cannot be, maintained that this rule, though observed in Elizabethan English, is observed by our best modern authors. Probably a general impression that cannot be used to refer to persons has assisted, who in supplanting that as a relative, but the convenience of the rule is so great that beginners in composition may with advantage adhere to the rule. The following are some of the cases where who and which are mostly used, contrary to the rule, instead of that. Exceptions A. When the antecedent is defined, e.g. by a possessive case, modern English uses who instead of that. It is rare, though it would be useful, 7, to say, his English friends that had not seen him, for the English friends, or those of his English friends, that had not seen him. b. That sounds ill when separated from its verb and from its antecedents, and emphasized by isolation. There are many persons that, though unscrupulous, are commonly good-tempered, and that, if not strongly incited by self-interest, are ready for the most part to think of the interest of their neighbors. Shakespeare frequently uses who after that when the relative is repeated. See Shakespearean Grammar, par. 260. See if the antecedent is qualified by that, the relative must not be that. Besides other considerations, the repetition is disagreeable. Addison ridicules such language as, "That remark that I made yesterday is not that I said that I regretted that I had made." d. That cannot be preceded by a preposition, and hence throws the preposition to the end. This is the rule that I adhere to. This is perfectly good English, though sometimes unnecessarily avoided. But with some prepositions, the construction is harsh and objectionable, e.g., "This is the mark that I jumped beyond," such were the prejudices that he rose above. The reason is that some of these disyllabic prepositions are used as adverbs, and when separated from their nouns, give one the impression that they are used as adverbs. After pronominal adjectives used for personal pronouns, modern English prefers who. There are many others, several those who can testify, and cf. After that used as a conjunction, there is sometimes a dislike to use that as a relative. cc. *9. Do not use redundant, and before which. 8. I gave him a very interesting book for a present, and which cost me 5 shillings. In short sentences the absurdity is evident, but in long sentences it is less evident, and very common. A petition was presented for rescinding that portion of the bylaws which permits application of public money to support sectarian schools over which ratepayers have no control, this being a violation of the principle of civil and religious liberty, and which the memorialists believe would provoke a determined and conscientious resistance. Here which ought grammatically to refer to portion, or schools, but it seems intended to refer to violation, omit, and, or repeat, a violation before which, or turn the sentence otherwise. *10. Equivalents for relative. A participle. Men thirsting for men that thirst for revenge are not indifferent to plunder. The objection to the participle is that here, as often, it creates a little ambiguity. The above sentence may mean men when they thirst, or though they thirst, as well as men that thirst. Often, however, there is no ambiguity. I have documents proving this conclusively. Be infinitive, instead of he was the first that entered. You can write to enter. 4. He is not a man who will act dishonestly to act. This equivalent cannot often be used. See whereby, wherein, and see can sometimes be used for by which, in which, so as to avoid a harsh repetition of which. The means whereby this may be effected, but this use is somewhat antiquated. If the man that does not care for music is to be pitied, can be written, though not so forcibly. If a man does not care for music, he is to be pitied. It is in long sentences that this equivalent will be found most useful. And this. He did his best, which was all that could be expected, can be written. And this was all that, and what? Let me repeat that which. 9. You ought to know that which is worth doing well. Let me repeat, what you ought to know, that what is worth doing well. Omission of relative. It is sometimes thought ungrammatical to omit the relative, as in the man that you speak of. On the contrary, that when an object, not when a subject, may be omitted, wherever the antecedent and the subject of the relative sentence are brought into juxtaposition by the omission. *10. Repeat the antecedent in some new form, where there is any ambiguity. This is particularly useful after a negative. He said that he would not even hear me, which I confess I had expected. Here the meaning may be, I had expected that he would, or that he would not hear me. Right. A refusal or a favor that I confess I had expected. C. 38. *11. Use particular for general terms. This is a most important rule. Instead of, I have neither the necessaries of life nor the means of procuring them. Write, if you can with truth, I have not a crust of bread, nor a penny to buy one. Caution. There is a danger in this use. The meaning is vividly expressed but sometimes may be exaggerated or imperfect. Crust of bread may be an exaggeration. On the other hand, if the speaker is destitute not only of bread, but also of shelter and clothing, then crust of bread is an imperfect expression of the meaning. In philosophy and science, where the language ought very often to be inclusive and brief, general and not particular terms must be used. 11a. Avoid verbal nouns where verbs can be used instead. The disadvantage of the use of verbal nouns is this, that, unless they are immediately preceded by prepositions, they are sometimes liable to be confounded with participles. The following is an instance of an excessive use of verbal nouns. The pretended confession of the secretary was only collusion to lay the jealousies of the king's favoring popery, which still hung upon him, notwithstanding his writing on the revelation, and affecting to enter on all occasions into controversy, asserting in particular that the Pope was Antichrist. Right. Notwithstanding that he wrote and affected and c. ** 12. Use a particular person instead of a class. **. What is the splendor of the greatest monarch compared with the beauty of a flower? What is the splendor of Solomon compared with the beauty of a daisy? Under this head may come the forcible use of noun for adjective. This fortress is weakness itself. An excess of this use is lengthy and pedantically bombastic, e.g., the following paraphrase for: in every British colony, under Indian palm groves, amid Australian gum trees, in the shadow of African mimosas, and beneath Canadian pines. * 13. Use metaphor instead of literal statement. *. The ship plows the sea, is clearer than. The ship cleaves the sea, and shorter than. The ship cleaves the sea as a plow cleaves the land. Of course, there are some subjects for which metaphor should not be used. See 14a and 14b. * 14. Do not confuse metaphor. *. In a moment the thunderbolt was upon them, deluging their country with invaders. The following is attributed to Sir Boyle Roche. Mr. Speaker, I smell a rat, I see him brewing in the air, but mark me, I shall yet nip him in the bud. Some words, once metaphorical, have ceased to be so regarded. Hence many good writers say, under these circumstances, instead of, in these circumstances. An excessive regard for disused metaphor savors of pedantry. Disregard is inelegant. Right, not unparalleled complications, but unprecedented complications. And he threw light on obscurities, instead of he unraveled obscurities. 14a. Do not introduce literal statement immediately after metaphor. He was the father of chemistry, and brother to the Earl of Cork. He was a very thunderbolt of war, and was lieutenant to the Earl of Mar. 14b. Do not use poetic metaphor to illustrate a prosaic subject. Thus, we may say, a poet soars, or even, though rarely, a nation soars to greatness. But you could not say, Consols soared to 94.5. Even commonplace subjects may be illustrated by metaphor, for it is a metaphor, and quite unobjectionable, to say, Consols mounted, or jumped to 94.5. But commonplace subjects must be illustrated by metaphor that is commonplace. Order of words in a sentence. * 15. Emphatic words must stand in emphatic positions, i.e., for the most part, at the beginning or at the end of the sentence. This rule occasionally supersedes the common rules about position. Thus, the place for an adverb, as a rule, should be between the subject and verb. He quickly left the room. But if quickly is to be emphatic, it must come at the beginning or end, as in, I told him to leave the room slowly, but he left quickly. Adjectives, in clauses beginning with if and though, often come at the beginning for emphasis. Insolent though he was silenced at last. 15a. Unemphatic words must, as a rule, be kept from the end of the sentence. It is a common fault to break this rule by placing a short and unemphatic predicate at the end of a long sentence. To know some Latin, even if it be nothing but a few Latin roots, is useful. Right. It is useful, and c. So, the evidence proves how kind to his inferiors he is. Often, where an adjective or auxiliary verb comes at the end, the addition of an emphatic adverb justifies the position, e.g. above. Is very useful, he has invariably been. A short, chippy ending, even though emphatic, is to be avoided. It is abrupt and unrhythmical, e.g. the soldier, transfixed with the spear, writhed. We want a longer ending. Fell writhing to the ground. Or, writhed in the agonies of death. A chippy ending is common in bad construing from Virgil. Exceptions. Prepositions and pronouns attached to emphatic words need not be moved from the end, e.g. he does no harm that I hear of. Bear witness how I loved him. N.B. In all styles, especially in letter writing, a final emphasis must not be so frequent as to become obtrusive and monotonous. 15b. An interrogation sometimes gives emphasis. No one can doubt that the prisoner, had he been really guilty, would have shown some signs of remorse. Is not so emphatic as, who can doubt, is it possible to doubt, and c. Contrast. No one ever names Wentworth without thinking of and c. with. But Wentworth, who ever names him without thinking of those harsh dark features, ennobled by their expression into more than the majesty of an antique Jupiter. 16. The subject, if unusually emphatic, should often be removed from the beginning of the sentence. The beginning of the sentence is an emphatic position, though mostly not so emphatic as the end. Therefore, the principal subject of a sentence, being emphatic, and being wanted early in the sentence to tell us what the sentence is about, comes as a rule, at or near the beginning. Thomas built this house. Hence, since the beginning is the usual place for the subject, if we want to emphasize Thomas, unusually, we must remove Thomas from the beginning. This house was built by Thomas. Or, it was Thomas that built this house. Thus, the emphasis on conqueror is not quite so strong in. A mere conqueror ought not to obtain from us the reverence that is due to the great benefactors of mankind. As in, we ought not to bestow the reverence that is due to the great benefactors of mankind upon a mere conqueror. Considerable, but less emphasis and greater smoothness, 19, will be obtained by writing the sentence thus. We ought not to bestow upon a mere conqueror and c. Where the same subject stands first in several consecutive sentences, it rises in emphasis, and need not be removed from the beginning, even though unusual emphasis be required. The captain was the life and soul of the expedition. He first pointed out the possibility of advancing. He warned them of the approaching scarcity of provisions. He showed how they might replenish their exhausted stock and c. 17. The object is sometimes placed before the verb for emphasis. This is most common in antithesis. Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are ye? Some he imprisoned, others he put to death. Even where there is no antithesis, the inversion is not uncommon. Military courage, the boast of the sottish German, of the frivolous and prating Frenchman, of the romantic and arrogant Spaniard, he neither possesses nor values. This inversion sometimes creates ambiguity in poetry, e.g., the son the father slew, and must be sparingly used in prose. Sometimes the position of a word may be considered appropriate by some, and inappropriate by others, according to different interpretations of the sentence. Take as an example. Early in the morning the nobles and gentlemen who attended on the king assembled in the great hall of the castle, and here they began to talk of what a dreadful storm it had been the night before. But Macbeth could scarcely understand what they said, for he was thinking of something worse. The last sentence has been amended by Professor Bain into what they said, Macbeth could scarcely understand. But there appears to be an antithesis between the guiltless nobles who can think about the weather, and the guilty Macbeth who cannot. Hence, what they said ought not, and Macbeth ought to be emphasized, and therefore, Macbeth ought to be retained at the beginning of the sentence. The same author alters. The praise of judgment Virgil has justly contested with him, but his invention remains yet unrivaled. Into Virgil has justly contested with him the praise of judgment, but no one has yet rivaled his invention. An alteration which does not seem to emphasize sufficiently the antithesis between what had been contested, on the one hand, and what remained as yet unrivaled on the other. More judiciously, Professor Bain alters. He that tells a lie is not sensible how great a task he undertakes, for he must be forced to invent 20 more to maintain one. For, to maintain one, he must invent 20 more, putting the emphatic words in their emphatic place, at the end. *18. Where several words are emphatic, make it clear which is the most emphatic. Thus, in the state was made, under the pretense of serving it, in reality the prize of their contention to each of these opposite parties. It is unpleasantly doubtful whether the writer means 1. State or 2. Parties to be emphatic. If 1. As for the state, these 2 parties, under the pretense of serving it, converted it into a prize for their contention. If 2. Right, those served in profession, the state was in reality converted into a prize for their contention by these 2 parties. In 1. Parties is subordinated, in 2. State. Sometimes the addition of some intensifying word serves to emphasize. Thus, instead of to effect this they used all devices, we can write to effect this they used every conceivable device. So, if we want to emphasize fidelity in the business will task your skill and fidelity, we can write not only your skill but also your fidelity. This, however, sometimes leads to exaggerations. See 2. Sometimes antithesis gives emphasis, as in, you do not know this, but you shall know it. Where antithesis cannot be used, the emphasis must be expressed by turning the sentence, as, I will make you know it, or by some addition, as, you shall hereafter know it. *19. Words should be as near as possible to the words with which they are grammatically connected. See paragraphs 20 to 29. For exceptions, see 30. *20. Adverbs should be placed next to the words they are intended to affect. When unemphatic, adverbs come between the subject and the verb, or, if the tense is compound, between the parts of the compound tense. He quickly left the room. He has quickly left the room. But when emphatic after the verb, he left, or has left, the room quickly. 10. When such a sentence as the latter is followed by a present participle, there arises ambiguity. I told him to go slowly, but he left the room quickly, dropping the purse on the floor. Does quickly here modify left or dropping? The remedy 11 is to give the adverb its unemphatic place. He quickly left the room, dropping and c, or else to avoid the participle thus. He quickly dropped the purse and left the room. Or, he dropped the purse and quickly left the room. *21. Only requires careful use. The strict 12 rule is that only should be placed before the word affected by it. The following is ambiguous. The heavens are not open to the faithful only at intervals. The best rule is to avoid placing only between 2 emphatic words, and to avoid using only where alone can be used instead. In strictness, perhaps the 3 following sentences: 1. He only beat 3. 2. He beat only 3. 3. He beat 3 only, ought to be explained severally thus: 1. He did no more than beat, did not kill 3. 2. He beat no more than 3. 3. He beat 3, and that was all he did. Here only modifies the whole of the sentence, and depreciates the action. But the best authors sometimes transpose the word he only lived, ought to mean he did not die or make any great sacrifice. But he only lived but till he was a man. Macbeth v. 840 means he lived only till he was a man. Compare also who only hath immortality. Only at the beginning of a statement equals but. I don't like to importune you, only I know you'll forgive me. Before an imperative it diminishes the favor asked. Only listen to me. This use of only is mostly confined to letters. Very often, only at the beginning of a sentence is used for alone. Only 10 came, only Caesar approved. Alone is less ambiguous. The ambiguity of only is illustrated by such a sentence as, don't hesitate to bring a few friends of yours to shoot on my estate at any time. Only 15 came yesterday. Which might mean, I don't mind a few, Only don't bring so many as 15. Or else. Don't hesitate to bring a few more. No more than 5 came yesterday. In conversation, ambiguity is prevented by emphasis. But in a letter, only thus used might cause unfortunate mistakes. Right. Yesterday only 5 came. If you mean, no more than 5. Asterisk 22. When not only precedes, but also, see that each is followed by the same part of speech. Asterisk. He not only gave me advice but also help. Is wrong. Right. He gave me not only advice but also help. On the other hand, he not only gave me a grammar but also lent me a dictionary. Is right. Take an instance. He spoke not only forcibly but also tastefully, adverbs, and this too, not only before a small audience, but also in prepositions, a large public meeting, and his speeches were not only successful, but also, adjective, worthy of success. Asterisk 23. At least, always, and other adverbial adjuncts sometimes produce ambiguity. Asterisk. I think you will find my Latin exercise, at all events, as good as my cousin's. Does this mean 1. My Latin exercise, though not perhaps my other exercises? Or 2. Though not very good, yet, at all events, as good as my cousin's? Right. For 1. My Latin exercise, at all events, you will find and see. And for 2. I think you will find my Latin exercise as good as my cousin's, at all events. The remedy is to avoid placing, at all events, between 2 emphatic words. As an example of the misplacing of an adverbial adjunct, take. From abroad he received most favorable reports, but in the city he heard that a panic had broken out on the exchange, and that the funds were fast falling. This ought to mean that the hearing, and not, as is intended, that the breaking out of the panic took place in the city. In practice, an adverb is often used to qualify a remote word, where the latter is more emphatic than any nearer word. This is very common when the adverbial adjunct is placed in an emphatic position at the beginning of the sentence. On this very spot our guide declared that Claverhouse had fallen. Asterisk 24. Nouns should be placed near the nouns that they define. Asterisk in the very common sentence. The death is announced of Mr. John Smith, an author whose works and see. The transposition is probably made from a feeling that, if we write, the death of Mr. John Smith is announced, we shall be obliged to begin a new sentence. He was an author whose works and see. But the difficulty can be removed by writing. We regret to announce, or we are informed of, the death of Mr. John Smith, an author, and see. Asterisk 25. Pronouns should follow the nouns to which they refer without the intervention of another noun. Asterisk avoid. John Smith, the son of Thomas Smith, who gave me this book, unless Thomas Smith is the antecedent of who. Avoid also. John supplied Thomas with money. He, John, was very well off. When, however, one of 2 preceding nouns is decidedly superior to the other in emphasis, the more emphatic may be presumed to be the noun referred to by the pronoun, even though the noun of inferior emphasis intervenes. Thus, at this moment the colonel came up, and took the place of the wounded general. He gave orders to halt. Here he would naturally refer to colonel, though general intervenes. A conjunction will often show that a pronoun refers to the subject of the preceding sentence, and not to another intervening noun. The sentinel at once took aim at the approaching soldier, and fired. He then retreated to give the alarm. It is better to adhere, in most cases, to Rule 25, which may be called Bain, the rule of proximity. The rule of emphasis, of which an instance was given in the last paragraph, is sometimes misleading. A distinction might be drawn by punctuating thus. David the father of Solomon, who slew Goliath. David, the father of Solomon who built the temple. But the propriety of omitting a comma in each case is questionable, and it is better to write so as not to be at the mercy of commas. Asterisk 26. Clauses that are grammatically connected should be kept as close together as possible. Asterisk, but see 55. The introduction of parentheses violating this rule often produce serious ambiguity. Thus, in the following, the result of these observations appears to be in opposition to the view now generally received in this country, that in muscular effort the substance of the muscle itself undergoes disintegration. Here it is difficult to tell whether the theory of disintegration is 1. The result, or, as the absence of a comma after b would indicate, 2. In opposition to the result of these observations, if 1 is intended at, and to prove, after, country, if 2 insert, which is after, country, there is an excessive complication in the following. It cannot, at all events, if the consideration demanded by a subject of such importance from any one professing to be a philosopher be given, be denied that and c. Where a speaker feels that his hearers have forgotten the connection of the beginning of the sentence, he should repeat what he has said, e.g., after the long parenthesis in the last sentence he should recommence. It cannot, I say, be denied. In writing, however, this license must be sparingly used. A short parenthesis, or modifying clause, will not interfere with clearness, especially if antithesis used, so as to show the connection between the different parts of the sentence, e.g., a modern newspaper statement, though probably true, would be laughed at if quoted in a book as testimony, but the letter of a court gossip is thought good historical evidence if written some centuries ago. Here, to place, though probably true, at the beginning of the sentence would not add clearness, and would impair the emphasis of the contrast between a modern newspaper statement and the letter of a court gossip. Asterisk 27. In conditional sentences, the antecedent clauses must be kept distinct from the consequent clauses. Asterisk. There is ambiguity in. The lesson intended to be taught by these maneuvers will be lost if the plan of operations is laid down too definitely beforehand, and the affair degenerates into a mere review. Begin, in any case, with the antecedent. If the plan, and c. Next write, according to the meaning, 1. If the plan is laid down, and the affair degenerates and c, then the lesson will be lost. Or 2. Then the lesson will be lost, and the affair degenerates into a mere review. Asterisk 28. Dependent clauses preceded by that should be kept distinct from those that are independent. Asterisk. Take as an example. 1. He replied that he wished to help them, and intended to make preparations accordingly. This ought not to be used, though it sometimes is, for shortness, to mean 2. He replied, and he intended. In 1. Intended, having no subject, must be supposed to be connected with the nearest preceding verb, in the same mood and tense, that has a subject, i.e., wished. It follows that 1 is a condensation of 3. He replied that he wished, and that he intended. 2, though theoretically free from ambiguity, is practically ambiguous, owing to a loose habit of repeating the subject unnecessarily. It would be better to insert a conjunctional word or a full stop between the two statements. Thus, 4. He replied that he wished to help them, and indeed he intended. And c. Or, he replied, and c. He intended, and c. Where there is any danger of ambiguity, use 3 or 4 in preference to 1 or 2. Asterisk 29. When there are several infinitives, those that are dependent on the same word must be kept distinct from those that are not. Asterisk. He said that he wished to take his friend with him to visit the capital and to study medicine. Here it is doubtful whether the meaning is. He said that he wished to take his friend with him. 1. And also to visit the capital and study medicine. Or 2. That his friend might visit the capital and might also study medicine. Or 3. On a visit to the capital, and that he also wished to study medicine. From the three different versions it will be perceived that this ambiguity must be met, a. by using that for 2, which allows us to repeat an auxiliary verb, e.g., might, in 2, and b. by inserting conjunctions. As to insertions of conjunctions, see 37. In order to, and for the purpose of, can be used to distinguish, wherever there is any ambiguity, between an infinitive that expresses a purpose and an infinitive that does not, e.g., he told his servant to call upon his friend to, in order to, give him information about the trains, and not to leave him till he started. Asterisk 30. The principle of suspense. Asterisk write your sentence in such a way that, until he has come to the full stop, the reader may feel the sentence to be incomplete. In other words, keep your reader in suspense. Suspense is caused, 1. By placing the if clause first, and not last, in a conditional sentence. 2. By placing participles before the words they qualify. 3. By using suspensive conjunctions, e.g., not only, either, partly, on the one hand, in the first place, and c. The following is an example of an unsuspended sentence. The sense straggles, and it is difficult to keep up one's attention. Mr. Pym was looked upon as the man of greatest experience in parliaments, where he had served very long, and was always a man of business, being an officer in the Exchequer, and of a good reputation generally, though known to be inclined to the Puritan party, yet not of those furious resolutions, Maud. Ing. So furiously resolved against the Church as the other leading men were, and wholly devoted to the Earl of Bedford, who had nothing of that spirit. The foregoing sentence might have ended at any one of the 8 points marked above. When suspended, it becomes: Mr. Pym, owing to his long service in Parliament in the Exchequer, was esteemed above all others for his parliamentary experience, and for his knowledge of business. He had also a good reputation generally, for, though openly favoring the Puritan party, he was closely devoted to the Earl of Bedford, and, like the Earl, had none of the fanatical spirit manifested against the Church by the other leading men. *30a. It is a violation of the principle of suspense to introduce unexpectedly, at the end of a long sentence, some short and unemphatic clause beginning with a, not, or b, which. A. This reform has already been highly beneficial to all classes of our countrymen, and will, I am persuaded, encourage among us industry, self-dependence, and frugality, and not, as some say, wastefulness. Right. Not, as some say, wastefulness, but industry, self-dependence, and frugality. B. After a long and tedious journey, the last part of which was a little dangerous owing to the state of the roads, we arrived safely at York, which is a fine old town. Exception. When the short final clause is intended to be unexpectedly and emphatic, it comes in appropriately, with something of the sting of an epigram. C. 42. Thus, the old miser said that he should have been delighted to give the poor fellow a shilling, but most unfortunately he had left his purse at home, a habit of his. Suspense naturally throws increased emphasis on the words for which we are waiting, i.e., on the end of the sentence. It has been pointed out above that a monotony of final emphasis is objectionable, especially in letter writing and conversation. *31. Suspense must not be excessive. Excessive suspense is a common fault in boys translating from Latin. Themistocles, having secured the safety of Greece, the Persian fleet being now destroyed, when he had unsuccessfully attempted to persuade the Greeks to break down the bridge across the Hellespont, hearing that Xerxes was in full flight, and thinking that it might be profitable to secure the friendship of the king, wrote as follows to him. The more English idiom is: when Themistocles had secured the safety of Greece by the destruction of the Persian fleet, he made an unsuccessful attempt to persuade the Greeks to break down the bridge across the Hellespont. Soon afterwards, hearing and see. A long suspense that would be intolerable in prose is tolerable in the introduction to a poem. See the long interval at the beginning of Paradise Lost between of man's first disobedience and sing, heavenly muse. Compare also the beginning of Paradise Lost, Book 2. High on a throne of royal state, which far outshone the wealth of Ormuz and of Ind, or where the gorgeous East with richest hand showers on her kings barbaric pearl and gold, Satan exalted sat. With the opening of Keats' Hyperion. Deep in the shady sadness of a vale, far sunken from the healthy breath of morn, far from the fiery noon and eve's one star, sat gray-haired Saturn, quiet as a stone. *32. In a long conditional sentence put the if clause, antecedent, or protasis first, asterisk. Everyone will see the flatness of revenge thy father's most unnatural murder, if thou didst ever love him, as compared with the suspense that forces an expression of agony from Hamlet in Ghost. If thou didst ever thy dear father love, Hamlet. O God! Ghost. Revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. The effect is sometimes almost ludicrous when the consequent is long and complicated, and when it precedes the antecedent or if clause. I should be delighted to introduce you to my friends, and to show you the objects of interest in our city, and the beautiful scenery in the neighborhood, if you were here. Where the if clause comes last, it ought to be very emphatic. If you were only here. The introduction of a clause with if or though in the middle of a sentence may often cause ambiguity, especially when a great part of the sentence depends on that. His enemies answered that, for the sake of preserving the public peace, they would keep quiet for the present, though he declared that cowardice was the motive of the delay, and that for this reason they would put off the trial to a more convenient season. C. 27. Asterisk 33. Suspense 13 is gained by placing a participle or adjective that qualifies the subject before the subject. Asterisk. Deserted by his friends, he was forced to have recourse to those that had been his enemies. Here, if we write, he deserted by his friends was forced, and c. he is unduly emphasized, and if we write, he was forced to have recourse to his enemies, having been deserted by his friends, the effect is very flat. Of course, we might sometimes write, he was deserted and forced, and c. but this cannot be done where the desertion is to be not stated but implied. Often, when a participle qualifying the subject is introduced late in the sentence, it causes positive ambiguity. With this small force, the general determined to attack the foe, flushed with recent victory and rendered negligent by success. An excessive use of the suspensive participle is French and objectionable, e.g., careless by nature, and too much engaged with business to think of the morrow, spoiled by a long-established liberty and a fabulous prosperity. Having for many generations forgotten the scourge of war, we allow ourselves to drift on without taking heed of the signs of the times. The remedy is to convert the participle into a verb depending on a conjunction. Because we are by nature careless, and c. or to convert the participle into a verb coordinate with the principal verb, e.g., we are by nature careless, and c. and therefore we allow ourselves, and c. Asterisk 34. Suspensive conjunctions, e.g., either not only on the one hand, add clearness, asterisk, take the following sentence. You must take this extremely perilous course, in which success is uncertain, and failure disgraceful, as well as ruinous, or else the liberty of your country is endangered. Here, the meaning is liable to be misunderstood, till the reader has gone half through the sentence. Right. Either you must, and c. and the reader is, from the first, prepared for an alternative. Other suspensive conjunctions or phrases are partly, for our part, in the first place, it is true, doubtless, of course, though, on the one hand. Asterisk 35. Repeat the subject when the omission would cause ambiguity or obscurity. Asterisk. The omission is particularly likely to cause obscurity after a relative standing as subject. He professes to be helping the nation, which in reality is suffering from his flattery, and he, or it, will not permit anyone else to give it advice. The relative should be repeated when it is the subject of several verbs. All the pleasing illusions which made power gentle and obedience liberal, which harmonized the different shades of life, and which, by a bland assimilation, incorporated into politics the sentiments that beautify and soften private society, are to be dissolved by this new conquering empire of light and reason. Asterisk 36. Repeat a preposition after an intervening conjunction, especially if a verb and an object also intervene. Asterisk. He forgets the gratitude that he owes to those that helped all his companions when he was poor and uninfluential, and to John Smith in particular. Here, omit to, and the meaning may be, that helped all his companions, and John Smith in particular. The intervention of the verb and object, helped, and companions, causes this ambiguity. Asterisk 37. When there are several verbs at some distance from a conjunction on which they depend, repeat the conjunction. Asterisk 14. When we look back upon the havoc that 200 years have made in the ranks of our national authors, and above all, when we refer their rapid disappearance to the quick succession of new competitors, we cannot help being dismayed at the prospect that lies before the writers of the present day. Here omit when, and we at once substitute a parenthetical statement for what is really a subordinate clause. In reporting a speech or opinion, that must be continually repeated, to avoid the danger of confusing what the writer says with what others say. We might say that the Caesars did not persecute the Christians, that they only punished men who were charged, rightly or wrongly, with burning Rome, and committing the foulest abominations in secret assemblies, and that the refusal to throw frankincense on the altar of Jupiter was not the crime, but only evidence of the crime. But see 6b. 37a. Repeat verbs after the conjunctions. Then as, and see. I think he likes me better than you. I either. Then you like me. Or, he likes you. Cardinal Richelieu hated Buckingham as sincerely as did the Spaniard Olivares. Omit did, and you cause ambiguity. Asterisk 38. If the sentence is so long that it is difficult to keep the thread of meaning unbroken, repeat the subject, or some other emphatic word, or a summary of what has been said. Asterisk. Gold and cotton, banks and railways, crowded ports, and populous cities, these are not the elements that constitute a great nation. This repetition, though useful and, when used in moderation, not unpleasant, is more common with speakers than with writers, and with slovenly speakers than with good speakers. The country is in such a condition that if we delay longer some fair measure of reform, sufficient at least to satisfy the more moderate, and much more, if we refuse all reform whatsoever, I say, if we adopt so unwise a policy, the country is in such a condition that we may precipitate a revolution. Where the relative is either implied, in a participle, or repeated, the antecedent must often be repeated also. In the following sentence we have the subject repeated not only in the final summary, but also as the antecedent. But if there were, in any part of the world, a national church regarded as heretical by 4/5 of the nation committed to its care, a church established and maintained by the sword, a church producing twice as many riots as conversions, a church which, though possessing great wealth and power, and though long backed by persecuting laws, had, in the course of many generations, been found unable to propagate its doctrines, and barely able to maintain its ground, a church so odious that fraud and violence, when used against its clear rights of property, were generally regarded as fair play, a church whose ministers were preaching to desolate walls, and with difficulty obtaining their lawful subsistence by the help of bayonets, such a church, on our principles, could not, we must own, be defended. Asterisk 39. It is a help to clearness, when the first part of the sentence prepares the way for the middle and the middle for the end, in a kind of assent. This assent is called climax. Asterisk. In the following there are two climaxes, each of which has three terms. To gossip A is a fault, B. To libel a crime, B. To slander a sin, B. In the following, there are several climaxes, and note how they contribute to the clearness of a long sentence. Man working has contrived A. the Atlantic cable, but I declare that it astonishes B. me far more to think that for his mere amusement C. that to entertain a mere idle hour C. he has created Othello and Lear, and I am more than astonished, I am awestruck B. at that inexplicable elasticity of his nature which enables him, instead of turning away D. from calamity and grief E. or instead of merely defying D. them, actually to make them the material of his amusement D. and to draw from the wildest agonies of the human spirit E. a pleasure which is not only not cruel F. but is in the highest degree pure and ennobling F. The neglect of climax produces an abruptness that interferes with the even flow of thought. Thus, if Pope, in his ironical address to mankind, had written, "Go, wondrous creature, mount where science guides, go, measure earth, weigh air, and state the tides, go, teach eternal wisdom how to rule," the ascent would have been too rapid. The transition from earth to heaven, and from investigating to governing, is prepared by the intervening climax. Instruct the planets in what orbs to run, correct old time, and regulate the sun, go, soar with Plato to th imperial sphere, to the first good, first perfect, and first fair. Asterisk 40. When the thought is expected to ascend and yet descends, feebleness and sometimes confusion is the result. The descent is called bathos. Asterisk. What pen can describe the tears, the lamentations, the agonies, the animated remonstrances of the unfortunate prisoners? She was a woman of many accomplishments and virtues, graceful in her movements, winning in her address, a kind friend, a faithful and loving wife, a most affectionate mother, and she played beautifully on the pianoforte. Intentional bathos has a humorous incongruity and abruptness that is sometimes forcible. For example, after the climax ending with the line, "Go teach eternal wisdom how to rule," Pope adds, "Then drop into thyself, and be a fool." 40a. A new construction should not be introduced without cause. A sudden and apparently unnecessary change of construction causes awkwardness and roughness at least, and sometimes breaks the flow of the sentence so seriously as to cause perplexity. Thus write, "virtuous and accomplished," or "of many virtues and accomplishments," not "of many virtues and accomplished, riding or walking," or "on foot or horseback," not "on foot or riding." In the same way, do not put adjectives and participles, active and passive forms of verbs, in too close juxtaposition. Avoid such sentences as the following. He had good reason to believe that the delay was not an accident, accidental, but premeditated, and for supposing, to suppose, or else, for believing, above, that the fort, though strong both by art and naturally, nature, would be forced by the treachery of the governor and the indolence of the general to capitulate within a week. They accused him of being bribed, receiving bribes from, by the king and unwilling, neglecting, to take the city. 41. Antithesis adds force, and often clearness. The meaning of liberal in the following sentence is ascertained by the antithesis. All the pleasing illusions which made power, A, gentle, B, and obedience, A, liberal, B, are now to be destroyed. There is a kind of proportion. As gentleness is to power, so liberality, in the sense here used, is to obedience. Now gentleness is the check on the excess of power, therefore liberal here applies to that which checks the excess of obedience, i.e. checks servility. Hence liberal here means free. The contrast also adds force. They aimed at the rule, A, not at the destruction, of their country. They were men of great civil, B, and great military, B, talents, and if the terror, C, the ornament, C, of their age. Excessive antithesis is unnatural and wearisome. Who can persuade where treason, A, is above reason, and might, B, ruleth right, B, and it is had for lawful, C, whatsoever is lustful, C, and commotioners, D, are better than commissioners, D, and common woe, E, is named commonwealth, E? 42. Epigram. It has been seen that the neglect of climax results in lameness. Sometimes the suddenness of the descent produces amusement, and when the descent is intentional and very sudden, the effect is striking as well as amusing. Thus, 1. You are not only not vicious, you are virtuous, is a climax. 2. You are not vicious, you are vice, is not climax, nor is it bathos, it is epigram. 15. Epigram may be defined as a short sentence expressing truth under an amusing appearance of incongruity. It is often antithetical. The Russian grandees came to, and diamonds, climax. Cord dropping pearls and vermin, epigram. These two nations were divided, and the bitter remembrance by mutual fear of recent losses, climax. And mountains, epigram. There is a sort of implied antithesis in. He is full of information, but flat also, like yesterday's Times. Verbosity is cured, not by a small, but by a large vocabulary. The name of epigram may sometimes be given to a mere antithesis, e.g., an educated man should know something of everything, and everything of something. 43. Let each sentence have one, and only one, principal subject of thought. This great and good man died on the 17th of September, 1683, leaving behind him the memory of many noble actions, and a numerous family, of whom 3 were sons, one of them, George, the eldest, heir to his father's virtues, as well as to his principal estates in Cumberland, where most of his father's property was situate, and shortly afterwards elected member for the county. which had for several generations returned this family to serve in Parliament. Here we have 1. The great and good man, 2. George, 3. The county, disputing which is to be considered the principal subject. 2, if not 3 sentences should have been made, instead of 1. Carefully avoid a long sentence like this, treating of many different subjects on one level. It is called heterogeneous. 44. The connection between different sentences must be kept up by adverbs used as conjunctions, or by means of some other connecting words at the beginning of each sentence. Leave out the conjunctions and other connecting words, and it will be seen that the following sentences lose much of their meaning. Pitt was in the army for a few months in time of peace. His biographer, accordingly, insists on our confessing that if the young cornet had remained in the service, he would have been one of the ablest commanders that ever lived. But this is not all. Pitt, it seems, was not merely a great poet in essay and a great general in posse, but a finished example of moral excellence. The truth is that there scarcely ever lived a person who had so little claim to this sort of praise as Pitt. He was, undoubtedly, a great man. But his was not a complete and well-proportioned greatness. The public life of Hampden or of Somers resembles a regular drama which can be criticized as a whole, and every scene of which is to be viewed in connection with the main action. The public life of Pitt, on the other hand, is, and see. The following are some of the most common connecting adverbs, or connecting phrases. 1. Expressing consequence, similarity, repetition, or resumption of a subject, accordingly, therefore, then, naturally, so that, thus, in this way, again, once more, to resume, to continue, to sum up, in fact, upon this. 2. Expressing opposition, nevertheless, in spite of this, yet, still, however, but, on the contrary, on the other hand. 3. Expressing suspension, undoubtedly, but, indeed, yet, on the one hand, on the other, partly, some, others. Avoid a style like that of Bishop Burnet, which strings together a number of sentences with and, or, so, or with no conjunction at all. Blake with the fleet happened to be at Malaga, before he made war upon Spain, and some of his seamen went ashore, and met the host carried about, and not only paid no respect to it, but laughed at those who did right. When Blake and C. *45. The connection between 2 long sentences sometimes requires a short intervening sentence, showing the transition of thought. Without force or opposition, chivalry, subdued the fierceness of pride and power. It obliged sovereigns to submit to the soft collar, 16, of social esteem, compelled stern authority to submit to elegance, and gave a dominating vanquisher of laws to be subdued by manners. But now, all is to be changed, smiley face, all the pleasing illusions which made power gentle and obedience liberal, which harmonized the different shades of life, and which, by a bland assimilation, incorporated into politics the sentiments that beautify and soften private society, are to be dissolved by this new conquering empire of light and reason. If the words italicized were omitted, the transition would be too abrupt, the conjunction but alone would be insufficient. Footnotes 5. 4. At the beginning of a sentence, sometimes causes temporary doubt, while the reader is finding out whether it is used as a conjunction or preposition. 6. It should refer, 1. Either to the noun immediately preceding, or 2. To some noun superior to all intervening nouns in emphasis. C. 25. 7. So useful that, on mature consideration, I am disposed to adopt that here and in several of the following exceptional cases. 8. Of course, and which may be used where which precedes. 9. That which, where that is an object, e.g., then set forth that which is worse. St. John 2. 10. Is rare in modern English. 10. Sometimes the emphatic adverb comes at the beginning, and causes the transposition of an auxiliary verb. Gladly do I consent. 11. Of course, punctuation will remove the ambiguity, but it is better to express oneself clearly, as far as possible, independently of punctuation. 12. Professor Bain. 13. C. 30. 14. The repetition of auxiliary verbs and pronominal adjectives is also conducive to clearness. 15. Professor Bain says, In the epigram, the mind is roused by a conflict or contradiction between the form of the language and the meaning really conveyed. 16. This metaphor is not recommended for imitation. Brevity. Asterisk 46. Metaphor is briefer than literal statement. Asterisk C. 13. The cares and responsibilities of a sovereign often disturb his sleep. Is not so brief as uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, where the effect of care on the mind is assimilated to the effect of a heavy crown pressing on the head. Asterisk 47. General terms are briefer though less forcible than particular terms. Asterisk thus. He devours literature, no matter of what kind, is shorter than novels or sermons, poems or histories, no matter what, he devours them all. 47a. A phrase may be expressed by a word. These impressions can never be forgotten, i.e., are indelible. The style of this book is of such a nature that it cannot be understood, i.e., unintelligible. The words, of such a nature that, are often unnecessarily inserted. See the extract from Sir Archibald Alison. Asterisk 48. Participles can often be used as brief, though sometimes ambiguous, equivalents of phrases containing conjunctions and verbs. Asterisk. Hearing, when he heard this, he advanced. See 7 for more instances. So, phrases containing conjunctions means phrases that contain conjunctions. This done, for, when this was done, he retired. Sometimes the participle, being, is omitted. France at our doors, he sees no danger nigh. For France being, or, though France is. Asterisk 49. Participles and participial adjectives may be used like adjectives, as equivalents for phrases containing the relative. Asterisk. The never-ceasing wind, the clamoring ocean, the drenching rain are instances. The license of inventing participial adjectives by adding ing to a noun is almost restricted to poetry. You could not write the crannying wind in prose. Asterisk 50. A statement may sometimes be briefly implied instead of being expressed at length. Asterisk thus, instead of the spirit of Christianity was humanizing, and therefore and see, or Christianity, since it was, or being, of a humanizing spirit, discouraged and see. We can write more briefly and effectively. Gladiatorial shows were first discouraged, and finally put down, by the humanizing spirit of Christianity. So instead of the nature of youth is thoughtless and sanguine, and therefore and see, we can write. The danger of the voyage was depreciated and the beauty of the island exaggerated by the thoughtless nature of youth. Sometimes a mere name or epithet implies a statement. It was in vain that he offered the Swiss terms. War was deliberately preferred by the hardy mountaineers, i.e., by the Swiss, because they were mountaineers and hardy. The deed was applauded by all honest men, but the government affected to treat it as murder, and set a price upon the head of him whom they called the assassin. The conqueror of Austerlitz might be expected to hold different language from the prisoner of St. Helena, i.e., Napoleon when elated by the victory of Austerlitz, and Napoleon when depressed by his imprisonment at St. Helena. Caution. Different names must not be used for the same person unless each of them derives an appropriateness from its context. Thus, if we are writing about Charles II, it would be in very bad taste to avoid repeating he by using such periphrases as the following. The third of the Stuarts hated business, the merry monarch died in the 54th year of his age, and c. Asterisk 51. Conjunctions may be omitted. Asterisk the omission gives a certain forcible abruptness, e.g., you say this, I, on the other hand, deny it. When sentences are short, as in Macaulay's writings, conjunctions may be advantageously omitted. Where a contrast is intended, the conjunction but usually prepares the way for the second of the two contrasted terms. He is good but dull, wherein is used instead of but, the incongruity savors of epigram. He always talks truthfully and prosily. He is always amusing and false. Asterisk 51a. The imperative mood may be used for if. Asterisk. Strip for if you strip, virtue of the awful authority she derives from the general reverence of mankind, and you rob her of half her majesty. Asterisk 52. Apposition may be used so as to convert two sentences into one. Asterisk. We called at the house of a person to whom we had letters of introduction, a musician, and what is more, a good friend to all young students of music. This is as clear as, and briefer than. He was a musician, and c. 53. Condensation may be effected by not repeating 1. The common subject of several verbs, 2. The common object of several verbs or prepositions. 1. He resided here for many years, and after he had won the esteem of all the citizens he died. And c. So, too, he came to, and was induced to reside in, this city, is shorter than. He came to this city, and was induced to reside in it. Such condensation often causes obscurity, and even where there is no obscurity, there is a certain harshness in pausing on light, unemphatic words, such as to, in, and see, as in the first example. 54. Tautology. The fault of repeating the same word several times unnecessarily is called tautology, e.g. This is a painful circumstance. It is a circumstance that I much regret, and he also will much regret the circumstance. But the fault is not to be avoided by using different words to mean the same thing, as, this is a painful event, it is a circumstance that I much regret, and he also will greatly lament the occurrence. The true remedy is to arrange the words in such a manner that there may be no unnecessary repetition. Thus, this is a painful circumstance, a circumstance that causes me, and will cause him, deep regret. The repetition of the same meaning in slightly different words is a worse fault than the repetition of the same word. See, for examples, the extract from Sir Archibald Alison, at the end of the book. Thus, a burning thirst for conquest is a characteristic of this nation. It is an ardent passion that, and see, other instances are, the universal opinion of all men. His judgment is so infallible that it is never deceived. And see. 55. Parenthesis may be used with advantage to brevity. We are all, and who would not be, offended at the treatment we have received, is shorter and more forcible than the sentence would have been if the parenthesis had been appended in a separate sentence. Who, indeed, would not be offended? Extreme care must, however, be taken that a parenthesis may not obscure the meaning of a long sentence. 56. Caution. Let clearness be the first consideration. It is best, at all events for beginners, not to aim so much at being brief, or forcible, as at being perfectly clear. Horace says, while I take pains to be brief, I fall into obscurity. And it may easily be seen that several of the rules for brevity interfere with the rules for clearness. Forcible style springs from 1. Vividness and 2. Exactness of thought, and from a corresponding 1. Vividness and 2. Exactness in the use of words. 1. When you are describing anything, endeavor to see it and describe it as you see it. If you are writing about a man who was killed, see the man before you, and ask, was he executed, cut down, run through the body, butchered, shot, or hanged? If you are writing about the capture of a city, was the city stormed, surprised, surrendered, starved out, or demolished before surrender? Was an army repelled, defeated, routed, crushed, or annihilated? 2. Exactness in the use of words requires an exact knowledge of their meanings and differences. This is a study by itself, and cannot be discussed here. 17. Footnotes. 17. See English Lessons for English People, pages 1 to 53. Exercises. For an explanation of the manner in which these exercises are intended to be used, see the preface. A number in brackets by itself, or followed by a letter, e.g. 43, 40a, refers to the rules. Letters by themselves in brackets, e.g. b, refer to the explanations or hints appended to each sentence. And b. 10a refers to the first section of Rule 10, 10a, to the rule following Rule 10. 1. Pleasure and excitement had more attractions for him than a. 36, 37a, his friend, and the two companions became estranged, 15a, gradually. A. Right 1. Than for his friend. Or 2. Than had his friend, had more attractions than his friend. 2. A. he soon grew tired of solitude even in that beautiful scenery. 36. The pleasures of the retirement. 8. Which he had once pined for, and 36. Leisure which he could use to no good purpose. 30. Being, 15. Restless by nature. This sentence naturally stops at purpose. Also, being restless seems, wrongly, to give the reason why leisure could not be employed. Begin. Restless by nature. 3. The opponents of the government are naturally, and not 40a, without justification, elated at the failure of the bold attempt to return 2 supporters of the government at the recent election. 10. Which is certainly to be regretted. Unjustifiably. Right for which, either 1. An attempt that and c. Or 2. A failure that and c. 4. Carelessness in the Admiralty departments has cooperated with nature to weaken the moral power of a government that particularly needs to be thought efficient in 5. This respect. 29. To counterbalance a general distrust of its excessive desire. 47a. To please everybody in foreign affairs. Right. The Navy. Instead of to right. In order to. So as to distinguish the different infinitives. C. Obsequiousness. 5. He was sometimes supported by Austria, who, oddly enough, appears under Count Bius to have been more friendly to Italy than 37a. France. 30. In this line of action. Begin with. In this line of action. Why? Right. Then was France. Or. Then France was. 6. There was something so startling in 5. This assertion, 4. That the discoveries of previous investigators were to be 47a. Treated as though they had never been made, and 4. That one who had not yet 47a. Attained the age of manhood had superseded the gray-headed philosophers. 8. Who had for centuries patiently sought after the truth. 4. That 5. It naturally provoked derision. This, that, and it cause a little perplexity. Right. The startling assertion that the discoveries b. ignored. c. a mere youth, a mere stripling. 7. One of the recommendations, on which very 2647 much depended of the Commission, was that a council in each province should establish smaller councils, each to have the oversight of a small district, and 37. Report to a central council on the state of education in C5. It. Right. Cardinal recommendations. Derive. Cardinal. Right. Either 1. And should report. Or 2. And to report. C. Right. In its province. Or. District. 8. At this A1 period in B11 event C1 transpired that destroyed the last hopes of peace. The king fell from his horse and died 2 hours after the fall D30, which was occasioned by his horses stumbling on a molehill, while he was on his return from reviewing his soldiers. What is a period? B. Express the particular kind of event, accident. C. What is the meaning of transpired? D. Transposed thus. While the king was on his return, his horse, the king fell and C. The cause should precede the effect. 9. He determined c. on selling all his estates, and, as soon as this was done, 40a. to c. quit the country. 33. Believing that his honor demanded this sacrifice, and 40a. in b. the hope of satisfying his creditors. Begin with. Believing that and c. b. hoping thereby to satisfy and c. to sell or. On quitting. 10. He read patiently on. Leading articles, foreign correspondence, money article and all. 43. During which his father fell asleep, and he b. went in search of his sister. Point out the absurdity of during which applied to the last part of the sentence. Meanwhile. B. Insert. Then. 11. The general was quite 1 conscious 40a. How treacherous were the intentions of those who were b. 49 entertaining him, and 40a. of the dangers from which he had escaped. 15. Lately. Distinguish between conscious and aware. B. Entertainers. 12. If certain A11 books had been published 100 years ago, there can be no doubt that certain recent B11 historians would have made great use of them. But it would C15b not, on that account, be judicious in a writer of our own times to publish an edition of the works of one of these B11 historians, in which large extracts from these books should be incorporated with the original text. A. Mrs. Hutchinson's Memoirs. B. Mr. Hume. C. Add at the end of the sentence. Surely not. 13. He made no attempt to get up a petition. 32. Though he did not like the new representative quite so well as A. 37a, his colleagues. A. As did his colleagues. Or as he liked his colleagues. 14. Though he was A. 15 obstinate and 15 unprincipled, yet he could not face an angered father. 15a, in spite of his effrontery. A. Begin with obstinate. 15. He was known to his country neighbors. A. 15. During more than 40 years as a gentleman of cultivated mind. 40a, whose principles were high. 40a, with polished address, happy in his family. And B. 40a, actively discharging local duties. And 40a, among political men, as an honest, industrious, and sensible member of Parliament. 40a, without C. eagerness to display his talents. 40a, who 10g was stanch to his party, and attentive to the interests of those whose D. 47a representative he was. A. During more and C. is emphatic, and affects the latter as well as the former half of the sentence, hence it should stand first. B. In the discharge of. C. Not eager. D. Condense into one word. 16. The poor think themselves no more disgraced by taking bribes at elections than A. 37a, the rich by offering them. A. Right 1. Then the rich think themselves disgraced. Or 2. Then they think the rich disgraced. 17. We are told that the Sultan Mahmud, by his perpetual wars A. 41, and his tyranny A. 41, had filled his dominions with B. 1 misfortune and C. 11 calamity, and greatly D. 11 diminished the population of the Persian Empire. This great Sultan had E. 50 a vizier. We are not F. 55-15 informed whether he was a humorist or an enthusiast G. But he pretended H. that he had learned from I. 11 someone how to understand the language of birds, so that he J. 5 knew what was said by any bird that opened its mouth. K. 44 One evening he was with the Sultan, returning from hunting. They saw a couple of owls which 10g were sitting upon a tree L8, which grew near an old wall out of a heap of rubbish. The Sultan said 6. He should like to know what the two owls were saying to one another, and asked the vizier to listen to their discourse and give him an account of it. The vizier, N31, pretending to be very attentive to the owls, approached the tree. He returned to the Sultan and said that 6. He had heard part of their conversation, but did not wish to tell him what it was. P5 He not Q31, being satisfied with this answer, forced him to repeat everything the owls had said, 20 exactly. R44 5 6 He told 5 him that the owls were arranging a treaty of marriage between their children, and that one of them, after agreeing to settle 500 villages upon the female owl, had prayed 6 that God would grant a long life to Sultan Mahmud, because as long as he reigned over them they would never want ruined villages. The story says S. that T5 he was touched with the fable 30 and S. that he A. 39 from that time forward consulted 15 the good of his people, and that he rebuilt the towns and villages V. which had been destroyed. A. Abroad at home. B. Ruin. C. Desolation. D. Half unpeopled. E. The vizier of NC. F. We are not informed. Is emphatic, and therefore should be inverted. Whether he was, and C. We are not informed. G. But he will be omitted when the vizier is made the subject of pretended. H. Pretended once meant claimed, professed. Right. Professed. I. A certain dervish. J. Introduce a new subject that you may substitute vizier for he. Thus, so that not a bird could open its mouth, but the vizier knew and see. K. As he was, one evening, and see. L. Note that the tree is represented as growing out of ruins. This is in accordance with the story of the mischief Mahmud had done. M. Omit this. N. Suspense is out of place in a simple narrative like this. The sentence therefore ends with Als. O. Upon his return. P. The Sultan Q. would not be satisfied. R. You must know then, and C. S. Omit. T. So touched that. U. End with people. V. Addison here uses, which, probably because of the preceding, that. We have to choose between sound and clearness, which implies that all the villages in the country had been destroyed, whereas the country had been only sea above, half unpeopled. 18. Though this great king never permitted any pastime to interfere with the duties of state, which he considered to be superior to 54 all other claims and of paramount importance, and a 37 kept himself so far under control that he allowed no one pursuit or amusement to run to any excess, yet he took 54 great pleasure in the chase, of which he was b2 excessively 54 fond, and for the purposes of which he created several large parks of considerable 54 magnitude. A. Either repeat though, or else strike out the first though, and begin a new sentence after excess. B. Point out the contradiction between excessively and what precedes. 19. To inundate a 11 their land, to man their ships, to leave their country, with all its miracles of art and industry, its cities, its villas, and its b11 pastures buried under the waves, c11, to bear to a distant climate their d11 faith and their old e11 liberties, to establish, with auspices that 10a might perhaps be happier, the new f11 constitution of their commonwealth, in a g11 foreign and strange h11 land in the Spice Islands of the Eastern Seas. 38 were the plans which they had the spirit to form. A. Introduce dikes. B. Introduce something peculiar to the Dutch, e.g., canals, tulip gardens. C. Of the German Ocean. D. The Dutch were Calvinists. E. The country was in old times. Batavia. So that Batavian would be a fit epithet to denote what the Dutch had inherited from their forefathers. F. Stadthaus, the German for town hall. G. Other stars. H. Strange vegetation. 20. During 20 years of unexampled prosperity, during a. which the wealth of the nation had shot 14a up and extended its branches on every side, and the funds had 14a soared to a higher point than had been ever attained before. B. 15. Speculation had become general. A. Omit. B. Begin a new sentence. This, or prosperity, had increased the taste for speculation. 21. At that time, A. 16, a mere narrow-minded pedant, for he deserves no better name, had been set up by the literary world as a great author, and as the supreme b. critic, alone qualified to deliver decisions which could never be b. reversed upon 15a. the literary productions of the day. A. And with one who was, for he deserves no better name, a mere narrow-minded pedant. B. Which could never be reversed, can be expressed in one word, or else the supreme reverse may be condensed into a personification. A very minus of contemporary criticism. 22. With the intention of fulfilling his promise, and 40a, intending also to clear himself from the suspicion that attached to him, he determined to ascertain how 40a far this testimony was corroborated, and a. 40a, the motives of the prosecutor, b. 43, who had begun the suit last Christmas. A. What were? B. Begin a new sentence. The latter, and c. Or the suit had been begun, and c. 23. The Jewish nation, relying on the teaching of their prophets, looked forward to a time when its descendants should be as numerous as the heavenly 11 bodies, and when the products a. 11 of the earth should be so increased as to create an abundant 54 plenty, when each man should rest beneath the shade of his own a. 11 trees, and when the instruments, 11, of war should be converted to the 11 uses of peace. A. Mention some products, trees of Palestine. 24. He replied 32, when he was asked the reason for his sudden unpopularity, that he owed it to his refusal to annul the commercial treaty, A8, which, Tenna, gave great displeasure to the poorer classes. A. Point out the ambiguity, and remove it by 8, or Tenna. 25. I saw my old schoolfellow again by mere accident when I was in London at the time of the first exhibition, 19, walking down Regent Street and looking in at the shops. Point out and remove the ambiguity. 26. He remained in the house while his speech was taken into consideration, which, 52, was a common practice with him, because the debates amused his sated mind, and indeed he used to say, A. 6b, that they were sometimes as good as a comedy. His Majesty had certainly never seen a more, 17, sudden turn in any comedy of intrigue, either at his own playhouse or the Duke's, than that which this memorable debate produced. A. And were sometimes, he used to say, as good and c. 27. The Commons would not approve the war, 20 expressly, either did they as yet condemn it, 20 expressly, and A. 18, the King might even have obtained a supply for continuing hostilities, 19, from them, on condition of B. redressing grievances connected with this c. administration of affairs at home, among which the declaration of indulgence was a very important d. 15_A_1. A. Right. They were even ready to grant the King and c. B. use the verb with a subject c. condense all this into one adjective, meaning that which takes place at home. D. End with a noun. Importance, or foremost place. 28. Next to thinking clearly, A5, it is useful to speak clearly, and whatever your position in life may hereafter be, it cannot be such, 54, as not to be improved by this, B, so that it is worth while making almost any effort to acquire, C, it, if it is not a natural gift, D, it being an undoubted, D, fact that the effort to acquire it must be successful, to some extent at least, if, D, it be moderately persevered in. A. Next in utility, comes speaking clearly, a power that must be of assistance to you, and c. B. If, therefore, you cannot speak clearly by nature, you and c. This power. D. Omit fact, for undoubtedly, with moderate perseverance, and c. 29. It A. 38 appears to me, 15, a greater victory than Agincourt, a grander triumph of wisdom and faith and courage than even the English Constitution or B. Liturgy, to have beaten back, or even fought against and stemmed in ever so small a degree, those basenesses that c. 10_A_ beset human nature, which are now held so invincible that the influences of them are assumed as the fundamental axioms of economic science. A. Begin with to have beaten, and c. and end with liturgy. B. Repeat for clearness and emphasis. The English. C. The besetting basenesses of, and c. 30. The A2 unprecedented impudence of our youthful representative reminds us forcibly of the unblushing and 40 remarkable effrontery c. which 26 he almost succeeds in equaling, of the member for St. Albans, whom R. B1 neophyte B1 alluded to in the last speech with which he favored those whom 47_A_ he represents. 19. As his pattern and example. A. Show that unprecedented is inconsistent with what follows. B. What is the meaning of neophyte alluded to? C. Begin a new sentence. Our young adventurer, and c. and end with. And he almost succeeds in equaling his master. 31. The A1 veracity of this story is questionable, and there is the more reason for doubting the A1 truth of the narrator, because in his remarks on the one observation of the Sabbath he distinctly A1 alludes to a custom that can be shown never to have existed. A. Distinguish between veracity and truth, observation and observance. Show the inconsistency between allude and distinctly. 32. It A5 is a most just distribution, 10A, which the late Mr. Tucker has dwelt upon so b. largely in his works, between pleasures in which we are passive, and pleasures in which we are active. And I believe every attentive observer of human life will assent to c. this position, that however d. grateful the sensations may occasionally be in which we are passive, it is not these, but the latter class of our pleasures, 8, which constitutes satisfaction, 38, which supply that regular stream of moderate and miscellaneous enjoyments in 10c, which happiness, as distinguished from voluptuousness, consists. A. There is great justice in and c. B. Omit. So. C. Admit. D. Not often now used in this sense. E. Repeat the antecedent. I mean those pleasures and c. 33. The prince seemed to have before him a limitless, 54, prospect of unbounded prosperity, carefully, 33, trained for the a. tasks of the throne, and stimulated by the a. pattern of his father b. who, 43, breathed his 3. last suddenly at the age of 62, just after the conclusion of the war. A. Find more appropriate words. B. Begin a new sentence. 34. On his way, he visited a son of an old friend, A. 25, who had asked him to call upon him on his journey northward. He, B. 5, was overjoyed to see him, and c. he sent for one of his most intelligent workmen and told d. him to consider himself at e. his service 30, as he himself could not take f. him as he g. wished about the city. A. If you mean that the son had asked him, right. An old friend's son who. If you mean that the friend had asked him, right. He had been asked by an old friend to call, on his journey northward, upon his son. Accordingly, he visited him on his way. B. Use, instead of he, some name meaning one who entertains others. C. Use participle d. the man. E. the strangers. F. his guest. G. Right. Could have wished to make it clear that he means the host. 35. Tillotson died in this year. He was exceedingly beloved both by King William and by Queen Mary, 43, who nominated Dr. Tennyson, Bishop of Lincoln, to succeed him. 36. A. The entertainment was arranged with a magnificence that was b. perfectly stupendous and c. most unprecedented, and which quite kept up his lordship's unrivaled reputation for unparalleled hospitality, and thanks to the unequaled energy of Mr. Smith, who is rapidly becoming one of the most effective toast-masters in the kingdom. The toasts were given with a spirit quite unexampled on occasions of this nature, and indeed we were forcibly reminded in this respect of the inimitable entertainment of 3 years ago. 2. A. Omit most of the epithets, or soften them down. Point out the contradictions in the sentence as it stands. B. Write a remarkable magnificence that quite and c. thus dispensing with the following. And c. show that most is superfluous. 37. If we compare Shakespeare with the other dramatic authors of the Elizabethan era, his wonderful superiority to them in the 15. knowledge of human nature is what 15a. principally strikes us. 38. The prince found himself at once in sore perplexity how to provide himself with the commonest comforts or even necessaries of life, when he landed on this desolate coast, being 33. accustomed to luxury. 39. This makeshift policy recommended itself to the succeeding ministers, A. 50, both because they were timid and because they were prejudiced, and they were delighted to excuse B. 13, themselves by quoting the example of one who, C. 34, had controlled the liberals and humored the conservatives, 37, commended himself to the country at large by his unfailing good humor, and D. 44. 37, done nothing worthy of the name of statesman. A. To the timidity and prejudices of N.C. B. Shelter themselves behind. C. While he had at once. D. Had yet done. 40. William Shakespeare was the son among the lesser lights of English poetry, and a native of Stratford-on-Avon, 14a. 41. 15b. I think, gentlemen, you must confess that any one of you would have done the same. 32. If you had been tempted as I was then, placed starving and ragged among wasteful luxury and comfort, deliberately instigated to acts of dishonesty by those whom I had been taught from infancy to love, a. Praised when I stole, mocked or punished when I failed to, 15a. Do, b. So, a. Insert another infinitive beside. Love. Love produces obedience. b. Repeat the verb instead of do so. 42. So far from being the first, 54, aggressor, he not, 22, only refused to prosecute his old friend when a favorable opportunity presented itself for revenging himself thus upon him, but also his friend's adviser, John Smith. Smith, A. et al., 23, events suspected, if he did not know of the coming danger, and had given no information of it. A. If, at all events, qualifies. Smith. The sentence must be altered. Yet, however innocent his friend may have been, at all events Smith suspected. If the words qualify. Suspected. Place them after. Suspected. 43. It is quite true that he paid 5_s_ per day to English navvies, and even SIXS. 19, in preference to 2_s_6_d_ to French navvies. 44. Having climbed to the apex of the Rigi to enjoy the spectacle of the sunrise, I found myself so incommoded by a number of illiterate individuals who had emerged from the hotel for one similar purpose, that I determined to quit them at the earliest practicable period, and therefore, without stopping to partake of breakfast, I wended my way back with all possible celerity. 3. A. The same. 45. You admit that miracles are not natural. Now whatever is unnatural is wrong, and since, by your own admission, miracles are unnatural, it follows that miracles are wrong. 1. 46. Who is the man that has dared to call into civilized alliance the 41 inhabitant of the woods, to delegate to the Indian the defense of our disputed rights? Insert some antithetical or other epithets. 47. Very 11, small proportion indeed of those who have attempted to solve this problem, b. 19, have succeeded in obtaining even a plausible solution. State what proportion succeeded, or, if you like, what failed. Not 1 in 100. B. Begin. Of all those that and c. 48. To be suddenly 47a, brought into contact with a system, 8, which forces one to submit to wholesale imposture, and to being, 40a, barbarously ill-treated, naturally repels, 15a, 1. Right either 1. Collision causes a natural repulsion. Or 2. When brought into contact, one is naturally repelled. Or if ill-treatment is emphatic 3. One is naturally repelled by collision with, and c. 49. We annex a letter recently addressed by Mr. S. direction to the editor of the In Contradiction of Statements, Equally Untrue, which appeared in that periodical, and A9, which the editor has undertaken to insert in the next number. I am sure that all must regret that statements so b. 51, utterly erroneous should have, c. 23, first appeared in a publication of such high character. What the writer intended to express was that the editor had undertaken to insert, not the statements, but the contradiction. B. Omit either so or utterly. C. Appeared first, or for the first time. 50. This is a book which, 10a, is short and amusing, which, 10a, can be easily understood, which, 10a, is admirably adapted for the purpose for which it, b, was, 54, written, and 10e, which ought to be more popular than the last work which, 10a, was published by the same author. Express, which can be understood in one adjective. B. Its purpose. 51. When thousands are left, 19, without 40, pity and without 40, attention, 19, on a field of battle, amid 40, the insults of an enraged foe, and 40, the trampling of horses, while the blood from their wounds, freezing as it flows, binds them to the earth, and 40, they are exposed to the piercing air, it, 15a, must be indeed a painful scene. The whole sentence must be remedied by 40. 52. The youth was naturally thoughtful, and disposed, 19, besides by his early training, 31, which had been conducted with great care, the object of his parents being to pave, 14, his way as far as possible over the stormy, 14, sea of temptation and to lead him into the harbor of virtue, to a sincere, b1, remorse, 19, for the b1, crimes that he had committed in the sight of heaven, and also for his recent b1, sin in breaking the laws of his country. A. First state the reasons for his being disposed. The youth was naturally thoughtful. Moreover, his early training had been conducted with great care by his parents, whose and c. He was therefore disposed and c. B. What is the difference between remorse and repentance? Between sin and crime? 53. A. One day, 54, early in the morning, the general was approached by a messenger, 30, in the midst of the entanglements and perplexities which had unexpectedly surprised him, when the perilous hour of 54 danger was at hand, and 37, in spite of their promises, even the tribes that were well disposed, 54, and friendly, were threatening to desert him, and 54, leave him to face the enemy, b. 23 alone. Condense the sentence by omitting some of the italicized words, e.g. a. Early one morning. b. Though there is no real ambiguity, unless a wrong emphasis is placed on enemy, yet, in strictness, alone ought to qualify enemy. Right therefore. Alone in the face of the enemy. 54. A man, a 10d, who neglected the ordinary duties of life, and immersed in study, devoted himself to grand plans for the benefit of mankind, b. 44, and refused to provide for the wants of those dependent on him, and suffered his aged relatives to become paupers because he would not help them, c. would, in my opinion, 34, be a bad man, and not altogether, d. 40a, without hypocrisy. A. If a man. b. If he refused, or while he refused. c. Such a man, or he. d. To some extent a hypocrite. 55. I cannot believe in the guilt of A1B10E, who, whatever may have been said to the contrary, can be shown, and has been shown by competent testimony proceeding from those who are said to have carefully examined the facts, in spite, 23, of many obstacles, to have resisted all attempts to, 29, induce him to leave his situation, c. 29, to consult his own interests and to, 29, establish a business of his own. A. His guilt. b1. For whatever NC. It can be shown by NC. That, in spite of NC, he resisted. Or to insert. In spite, obstacles. Between, have, and, carefully. c1. For the purpose of consulting, and establishing. Or to write. And to consult his own interests by establishing and c. 56. We must seek for the origin of our freedom, a. 37, prosperity, and a. 37, glory, in that and only b. that 18, portion of our annals 30, though its c. is sterile and obscure. The great English people was d. then formed, the notional e. disposition began d. then to exhibit those peculiarities which it has ever since e. possessed, and our fathers d. then became emphatically islanders f. in their politics, a. feelings, and a. manners, and 30a. not merely in their geographical position. A. Repeat the pronominal adjective b. Express the emphatic, only that by beginning the sentence thus. It is in that portion of our annals and c. C. Omit. D. It was then that and c. E. Use words implying something more marked than disposition, and more forcible than possessed. In the latter case. Retained. F. Repeat. Islanders. 57. A. He was the universal, 54, favorite of, 54, all 8, who knew him, and cemented many friendships at this period, a. 33, moving in the highest circle of society, and as he b. 50 had a. for a. certain property, being independent of the profits of literature, and soon completely extinguished the breath of slander which at the outset of his career had threatened to sap the foundations of his reputation. A. Begin. Moving in and c. b. Rendered independent of, by and c. Show that rule, 14, is violated by the metaphors. 58. The outward and material form of that city which, during the brief period which, 10a, is comprised in our present book, reached the highest pitch of military, artistic, and literary glory, was of this, a, 15, nature. The progress of the b5 first has been already traced. A. Begin the sentence with, such was. B. By the first is meant military glory. 59. The detachment not only failed to take the fort, 30, spite of their numbers and the weakness of the garrison, but also to capture the small force that was encamped outside the town, and was, after some sharp fighting, driven back with inconsiderable loss. Point out the ambiguity. Remedy it by inserting either which or the assailants. 60. A. B. Believing that these reforms can only c. 21 be effected as public opinion is prepared for them, and that 5. This will be more or less advanced in different localities. The bill of the association, a. 31, which has been for a 3. considerable period in draft, and will be introduced in the next session of Parliament, provides for placing d. 3. the control in regard to the points above mentioned in the 3. hands of the ratepayers of each locality, the power to be exercised through representative licensing boards to be periodically elected by them. A. Place the parenthesis first, as an independent sentence. The bill of the association has been, Parliament. B. What noun is qualified by believing? Right. In the belief. C. Effected only so far as they are in accordance with public opinion, which and c. D. It or the bill provides that the ratepayers shall receive control, and shall exercise this control. 61. I think they are very, 1. nice persons, for they kept me amused for a long, 11, time together yesterday by their, 1. nice stories all about what they, b. have experienced in Japan, where they had been for ever so long, and c. 43, where they said that the natives ripped up their, d. 5 stomachs. A. Mention sometime. B. Experiences or adventures. C. Among other things, they told us, and c. D. Their own. 62. To contend for advantageous monopolies, which are regarded with a dislike and a suspicion, a. which daily, 10a, increases 30, however natural it may be to be annoyed at the loss of that which one has once possessed, 15a, is useless. A compound adjective can be used, including daily. 63. Upon entering the rustic place of entertainment to partake of some refreshment, my nerves were horrified by lighting on a number of boisterous individuals who were singing some species of harvest song, and simultaneously imbibing that cup which, if it cheers, also inebriates, and when, banished from their society by the fumes of the fragrant weed, I wended my way to the apartment which adjoined the one in which I had hoped to rest my weary limbs, I found an interesting assortment of the fairer sex, who were holding a separate confabulation apart from the revels of their rougher spouses. Right. Village inn next room. And c. for these absurd circumlocutions. C3. 64. When Burgoyne was born, in 1782, Napoleon and Wellington were both boys, 11. Napoleon studied at Brienne, Wellington at Eton. Mention this, and in order to imply the boyhood, call Wellington Arthur Wellesley. 65. An honorable friend of mine, who is now, I believe, near me, 38, to whom I never can on any occasion refer without feelings of respect, and on this subject 36, feelings of the most grateful homage, 38, whose abilities upon this occasion, as upon some former ones, are not entrusted merely to the perishable eloquence of the day, but will live to be the admiration of that hour when all of us are mute and most of us forgotten. B. 38, has told you that prudence is 52, the first of virtues, and 52, can never be used in the cause of vice. A. Though, of the day, is a recognized expression for ephemeral, or transitory, yet to use day for a short time and hour for a longer is objectionable. Right moment for day, else right future for hour. B. This gentleman has told, and c. 66. To see the British artisan and his wife on the Sabbath, neat and clean and cheerful, with their children by their sides, a. 19, disporting themselves under the open canopy of heaven, is 15, pleasant. a. There is no reasonable ground for mistaking the sense here, as the context makes it clear, but since Lord Shaftesbury was questioned whether he meant disporting to qualify artisan and his wife, or children, right, and by their sides their children disporting, and c. 67. Even if a. it were attended with extenuating circumstances, such conduct would deserve severe reprobation. b. and it is the more called for because it would seem that c. it was the intention of the author of the crime, in perpetrating it, to inflict all the misery that was possible upon his victim. c. 5. a. omit it were, b. which, c. to have been, d. express author of the crime, in one word. Use the noun. 68. The a1 observance of the heavenly bodies must have been attended with great difficulties. b. 30. Before the telescope was a1 discovered, and it is not to be wondered at if the investigations of astronomers were often unsatisfactory, and failed to produce complete a1 persuasion. 30. 15. a. Under these disadvantages. a. What is the difference between observance and observation, discover and invent, persuasion and conviction? b. Begin. Before and c. 69. He plunged into the sea once more. 30. Not content with his previous exertions. After a long and dangerous struggle, he succeeded in reaching a poor woman that was crying piteously for help, and a. 35. was at last hauled safely to shore. a. Point put and remedy the ambiguity by inserting he, or by writing who, according to the meaning. 70. Sir John Burgoyne himself, face to face with Todleben, became a1 conscious of the difference between the fortifications of San Sebastian and of Sebastopol, b. which 10e was c. 12, very weak compared with Metz or Paris. a. What is the exact meaning of conscious? b. Avoid the relative, by repeating the name, with a conjunction c. Weakness itself. 71. Upon Richard's leaving this sea stage, the Commonwealth was again set up, and the Parliament which Cromwell had a. broken was brought together, but the army and they fell into new disputes, so they were again a. broken by the army, and upon that the nation was like to fall into b. 11 great convulsions. a. moderne, broken up, b. violently convulsed. c. It is a question whether this metaphor is in good taste. The meaning is that Richard retired from public life. It might be asserted that Richard, the Commonwealth, the Parliament are regarded as so many puppets on a stage, but this is extremely doubtful. Make Parliament the principal subject. When Richard retired, and when the Commonwealth and c. the Parliament was but falling into a dispute with and c. it was c. 18 and 43. 72. What a revolution in the military profession! He began with a. 11 unnecessary formality and b. 11 inefficient weapons, and ended with c. b. 11 greatly improved firearms. a. Pigtail and pipeclay, b. 6-pounders and flintlocks, are now inefficient compared with 24-pounders and breech loaders. c. Something is wanted antithetical to a. perhaps loose drill, or open order. 73. Children fear to go in the dark. Men fear death in the same way. The fear of children is increased by tales. So is the fear of death. The contemplation of death, as the wages of sin, and passage to another world, is holy and religious. The fear of it, as a tribute due unto nature, is weak. In religious meditations on death there is sometimes mixture of vanity and of superstition. Insert connecting adverbs or conjunctions. C. 44. 74. I have often heard him reiterate, 54, repeatedly that he would never again, if a safe, 54, and secure path was open to him, prefer the perilous, 54, road of danger, however alluring, 54, and attractive the latter might be. 75. I thought in my dream that when my friend asked me whether I did not observe anything curious in the conduct of the pigeons, I remarked that if any one of the birds was so bold as to take an atom from a heap of grain in the midst of them, 31, which, a detachment guarded, and which, being continually increased and never eaten, seemed useless, all the rest turned against him and pecked him to death for this 50 action. A. Point out the ambiguity. B. This should come earlier in the sentence, and not as a parenthesis. I noticed a heap of grain in the midst of them, guarded by, being continually, to all appearance, useless, yet. C. Theft. 76. If this low view of the royal office becomes generally adopted, then sovereigns who, 8, have always hitherto commanded the respect of Englishmen will by degrees fall into disrespect. Point out the ambiguity. Show how it might be removed, A. By punctuation, B. By altering. Who? 77. I struck the man in self-defense. I explained this to the magistrate. He would not believe me. Witnesses were called to support my statements. He committed me to prison. He had the right to do this. It is a right that is rarely exercised in such circumstances. I remonstrated. C. 44. Insert conjunctions or connecting adverbs. 78. He attained a very distinguished position by mere 15 perseverance and common sense, which 52 10a qualities are perhaps mostly underrated. 30. Though he was deficient in tact and not remarkable for general ability. 79. Vindictiveness, which 50 is a fault, b, and which may be defined as anger, 10a, which is caused not by sin nor by crime but by personal injury, ought to be carefully distinguished from resentment, which 50 is a virtue, b, and which is anger, 49, which is natural, and c, right caused by an act, d, which is unjust, because it is unjust, 30a, not because it is inconvenient. A. The fault of vindictiveness, the virtue of resentment. B. Omit C. Right cannot be used as an adjective, but righteous can. D. An act of injustice. 80. A. He told his friend that A. His brother was surprised that A. He had given so small a contribution, for A. He was B. 12. A very rich man, in spite of A. His recent losses and the bad state of trade, 1930, compared with himself. A. Use 6. B. What Asian king was proverbial for wealth? 81. A. 15b. It must be indeed wrong to A. Crucify a Roman citizen if to B. 32. Slay one is almost parricide, to B. Scourge him is a monstrous crime, and to B. Bind him is an outrage. A. What must it be? B. C. 40. 82. The universal, 54, opinion of all the citizens was that the citadel had been, 15, betrayed, 30, having been captured in broad daylight by a very small number of the enemy, and those unprovided with scaling ladders, and admitted by a postern gate, 15a, and much wearied by a long march. In any case, betrayed, must come at the end of a sentence. The sentence may be converted into two sentences. The citadel had been captured. Naturally, therefore, or the opinion, for it had been captured. Else, if one sentence be used right, as the citadel had been captured, and c. 83. This author surpassed all those who were living, a. at the same time with him in the forcible, b. manner in which he could address c. an appeal to the popular sympathy, and in the ease with which he could draw towards a. himself the hearts of his readers. A. Express in one word. B. Force with. C. Omit. 84. This great statesman was indeed a pillar of commerce, and a star in the financial world. He guided or impelled the people from the quicksands of protection and false political economy to the safe harbor of free trade, and 14a, saved the country several millions. A. It would be well to literalize the preceding metaphors. Else the literal statement must be changed into a metaphor. 85. The ministers were most unwilling to meet the houses, A. 43, 51, because even the boldest of them, though their counsels were lawless, 15, and desperate, had too much value for his, B. 11, personal safety to think of resorting to these, C. 12, unlawful modes of extortion that had been familiar to the preceding age. A. Begin a new sentence with lawless and desperate though their counsels had been, and c. B. Neck. C. Insert some of these unlawful modes. Benevolences, ship money, and the other, and c. 86. We will not, a. 15. Pretend to guess what our grandchildren may think of the character of Lord Byron, as exhibited in 15a, his poetry. No writer ever had the whole eloquence of scorn, misanthropy, and a. 15, despair, 15a, so completely at his command. That fountain, b. 12, of bitterness was never dry. A. We will not pretend to guess, and despair are intended by the author to be emphatic. B. Mara. 87. The captain asked to be allowed 50 men, a supply of food, and 150 breech-loaders. 44. The general replied coldly that he could not let his subordinate have a for anything that he wanted. 44. The captain was forced to set out. 34. With an insufficient force, spite of the superabundance of soldiers doing nothing in the camp. 34. And with every obstacle put in his way by a general who from the first had resolved not even to give him ordinary assistance. B. Tenna, which the captain had for some time anticipated. A. Point out and remove the ambiguity. B. Write, according to the meaning. Assistance that. Or. A resolution that. 88. I am a practical man, and disbelieve in everything. 8. Which is not practical. Theories. A. Which amuse philosophers and pedants have no attractions for me. 30. For this reason. A. What difference in the meaning would be caused by the use of that for the second, which? 89. Yet, when that discovery drew no other severity but the 11a turning a him out of office, and the 11a passing a sentence b condemning him to die for it. 31. Which was presently pardoned, and he was after a short confinement restored to his liberty. All men believed that the king knew of the letter c. 43, and that 6b. The pretended confession of the secretary was only collusion to lay the jealousies of the kings. D. 11a, favoring popery. E. 43, which still hung upon him. 30. Notwithstanding his e. writing on the revelation, and his e. affecting to enter on all occasions into controversy, e. asserting in particular that the Pope was Antichrist. A. Expulsion from. B. A pretended sentence to death, a pretense that was soon manifested by his pardon and liberation. C. Begin a new sentence. The secretary's pretended confession, it was said, was and c. D. The suspicion that the king favored popery. E. The juxtaposition of the two verbal nouns, writing and affecting, with the participle asserting, is harsh. Right. 4. Notwithstanding that he affected controversy, and attacked the Pope as Antichrist in his treatise on the Book of Revelation, the king was still suspected. 90. The opinion that the sun is fixed was once too, a 1. Universal to be easily shaken, and a similar prejudice has often, b. rendered the progress of new inventions, 15a, very slow. 19. Arising from the numbers of the believers, and not 36, the reasonableness of the belief. A. Right. General. Show the absurdity of appending to universal. B. What single word can be substituted for rendered slow? 91. The rest of the generals were willing to surrender unconditionally. 30. Depressed by this unforeseen calamity. 4. Only the young colonel, who retained his presence of mind, represented to them that they were increasing the difficulties of a position in itself very difficult. 19. 15. A. By their conduct. 92. To A. 31. An author who is, in his expression of any sentiment, wavering between the b. demands of perspicuity and energy, of which the c. 40a. former of course requires the first care, lest 40a. he should fail of both, and 37. Doubting whether the d. phrase which 8. has e. the most force and brevity will be f. readily taken, g. in it may, h. 3. be recommended to use both d. expressions, first h. to expound the sense sufficiently to be clearly understood, and then I. to contract it into the most compendious and striking form. A. Right. When an author and c. b. can be omitted. C. Assimilate the constructions of which the former must, of course, be aimed at first, lest both be missed. D. Use expression or else phrase in both places. E. Assimilate the construction to what follows. Right. That is most forcible and brief. F. Insert. Also. G. Understood. H. Let him use, first let him expound. I. Omit. 93. When I say a great man, I not, 22, only mean a man intellectually great but also morally, 38, who 8, has no preference for diplomacy, a, 23, at all events which, 10a, is mean, petty, and underhanded to secure ends which, 8, can be secured by an honest policy equally, 20, well, 38, who 8, does not resemble Polonius, b, who prefers to get at truth by untruthful tricks, and b, who considers truth a carp which, 10g, is to be caught by the bait falsehood. We cannot call a petty intriguer great, c. 30, though we may be forced to call an unscrupulous man by that, 15a, name. A. At all events no preference. B. Why is who right here? If you like you can write. Does not, like Polonius, prefer and consider. C. End with. We cannot give the name to a petty intriguer. 94. I regret that I have some a3 intelligence which, 10a, is of a most 3 painful nature, and which I must tell you at once, though b. I should like to defer it on c. 40a, account of your ill health, and because c. 40a, you have already had many troubles, and 40a, owing to the natural dislike which, 8, a friend must always feel to say that, 10f, which is unpleasant. Many old friends in this district have turned against you. I scarcely like to write the words. Only, 21, I remain faithful to you, and I am sure you will believe that I am doing that, 10f, which is best for your interests. A. News. B. In a letter these words should remain as they are, but if a period is desired, they must, 30, come last, after. Unpleasant. C. Right. Because of your ill health, and the troubles, and because of. 95. The general at once sent back word that the enemy had suddenly appeared on the other side of the river, and 35, or 37 then a, retreated. B. It was thought that b. It would have shown more c. 1. Fortitude on his 3. part if he had attacked the fortifications d. which were not tenable for more than a week at all events. Such was the 54 universal opinion, at 23 least, of 54, all the soldiers. A. Point out the ambiguity. B. It was thought he would have shown and c. Distinguish between fortitude and bravery. D. What would be the meaning if that were substituted for which? It would be perhaps better to substitute for which since they. 96. A notion has sprung up that the Premier, though he can legislate, cannot govern, and has attained an influence which renders it imperative, if this ministry is to go on, that a. it should be dispersed. A. Who or what has attained? Right. And this notion has become so powerful that, unless it is dispersed. 97. Those who are habitually silent, a. 3, by disposition and morals are less liable to the fault of exaggerating than those who are habitually, a. 3, fond of talking, and 40a, of a. 3, a pleasant disposition. A. Each of these periphrases must be condensed into a single adjective. 98. This author, a. 31, though he is not b. altogether c. guiltless of b. occasional c. faults of exaggeration, which are to be found as plentifully in his latest works as in those which he d. published when he was beginning his career as an author, yet, notwithstanding these defects, surpassed all those who were living at the same time with him in the clear manner in which he could, as it were, see into the feelings of the people at large, and in the a power that indeed could not be resisted, with which he drew toward himself the sympathy of those who perused his works. C. 54. A. Convert the parenthesis into a separate sentence. B. One of these words is unnecessary. C. One of these is unnecessary. D. Condense. His earliest. E. Omit these words as unnecessary. F. Express all this in one word. G. Clearness with. 99. Among the North, a. 23, American Indians. I had indeed heard of the perpetration of similar atrocities, but it seemed intolerable that such things should occur in a civilized land, and I rushed from the room at once, leaving the wretch where he stood, with his tale half told, 30, horror-stricken at his crime. A. Make it evident whether the speaker once lived among the North American Indians, or not, and show who is horror-stricken. 100. His 1. Bravery under this painful operation and the 1. Fortitude he had shown in heading the last charge in the recent action. 30. Though he was wounded at the time and had been unable to use his right arm, and was the only officer left in his regiment, out of 20 who were alive the day before. 19. Inspired every one with admiration. Begin. Out of 20 officers and c. Though wounded and c. He had headed. The bravery he had then shown in 101. Moral as well as 41. Other considerations must have weight when we are selecting an officer. A. That 10b. will be placed in a position that will task his intelligence. B. 18. And his fidelity. A. The repetition of that is objectionable. Use. To fill. B. And can be replaced by some other conjunction to suit what precedes. 102. It happened that at this time there were a few radicals in the House who, 8, could not forgive the Prime Minister for being a Christian. Point out the difference of meaning, according as we read, who or that. 103. It cannot be doubted, 15b, that the minds of a vast number of men would be left poor shrunken things, full of melancholy and indisposition, and unpleasing to themselves, if 32, there were taken out of men's minds vain opinions, false valuations, imaginations as 1a would, and the 15a, like. A. The meaning, which cannot easily be more tersely expressed than in the original, is castles in the air, pleasant fancies. 104. God never wrought a miracle to refute atheism, because his ordinary works refute it. A. A little philosophy inclines man's mind to atheism. Depth in philosophy brings men's minds back to religion. 44. While the mind of man looks upon second causes scattered, it may sometimes rest in them. 44. When it beholds the chain of them confederate and linked together, it must needs acknowledge a providence. 44. That school which is most accused of atheism most clearly demonstrates the truth of religion. A. Insert a suspensive conjunction. C. 34. 105. The spirit of liberty and the spirit of nationality were once for all dead. A. 5. It might be for a time a pious duty, but it could not continue always expedient, or c. 15. 18. Profitable to. B. 13. Mourned. C. 15a. For their loss. Yet this is the B. 13. Feeling of the age of Trajan. A. Omit. B. To sit weeping by their grave. Attitude. C. Notice that expedient or profitable are emphatic, as is shown by yet in the next sentence. Make it evident, therefore, by their position, that these words are more emphatic than to mourn and c. 106. A. If we ask, 15b, what was the nature of the force by which this change was effected? A. We find it to have been b. The force that had seemed almost dead for many generations. 38. Of theology. A. Omit these words. B. Begin a new sentence. It was a force, and c. 107. I remember Longinus highly recommends a description of a storm by Homer, because a. 5c. He has not amused himself with little fancies upon the occasion, as authors of an inferior genius, whom he mentions, b. 15a, have done. 30. But c. Because he has gathered together those d1 events which are the most apt to terrify the imagination, and 35. Really happen in the raging of a tempest. A. The poet. B. Omit, have done, and write. Like some authors. C. Suspend the sentence by writing the poet instead of has. D. What is the word for that which happens around one, or in connection with some central object? 108. To have passed a. 3. In a self-satisfied manner through 20 years of office, letting things take their own course. To have b. Sailed with consummate sagacity, never against the tide of popular c. judgment. To have left on record as the sole title to distinction among English ministers a peculiar art of d. Sporting with the heavy, the awful responsibility of a nation's destiny with the jaunty grace of a juggler. 11. Playing with his golden ball, to have joked and intrigued and bribed and f. deceived, with the result of having done nothing, either for the poor, or for religion, which indeed he did worse than nothing, or for art and science, or for the honor or concord or even the financial prosperity of the nation, 38, is surely a miserable basis on which the reputation of a great, 15, statesman can be, 15a, founded. A. Complacently. B. Sail implies will and effort. Use a word peculiar to a helpless ship, so as to contrast paradoxically with sagacity. C. Use a word implying less thought and deliberation. D. With is too often repeated, right bearing, so as to introduce the illustration abruptly. E. Tossing. F. Use a word implying a particular kind of deceit. Not lying, but the next thing to lying. G. Insert the word with the preceding and intensifying adverb. Absolutely nothing. H. Instead of either or. Repeat. Nothing. I. The parenthesis breaks the rhythm. Right. Nothing, or worse than nothing. K. To found. 109. A glance at the clock will make you 1. Conscious that it is nearly 3 in the morning, and I therefore ask you, gentlemen, instead of wasting more time, to put this question to yourselves: are we, or are we not, here, for the purpose of 1. Eliminating the truth? 110. The speech of the right honorable member, so far from unraveling, 14, the obscurities of this knotty question, is eminently calculated to mislead his supporters, 8a, who have not made a special study of it. It may be b. 23, almost asserted of every statement 8, which he has made that the very 1. converse is the fact. A. The meaning appears to be, not all his supporters, but those of his supporters who, the convenience of writing, his supporters that, is so great that I should be disposed to use that. B. Every, not asserted, requires the juxtaposition of almost. 111. The provisions of the treaty which, 8, required the consent of the Parliament of Canada await its assembling. Point out the meaning conveyed by which, and by that. 112. Mrs. Smith demonstrated, 26, in opposition to the general dictum of the press that a. there had been a reaction against woman's suffrage, that there had really been a gain of 1 vote in the House of Commons. A. Substitute. Instead of, and erase the second. That. 113. The practice of smoking hangs like a gigantic, 14a, cloud of evil over the country. Footnotes. 18. That which treats of the 13th century. Continuous exercises. Clearness. The following exercises consist of extracts from Burnet, Butler, and Clarendon, modernized and altered with a view to remove obscurity and ambiguity. The modernized version will necessarily be inferior to the original in unity of style, and in some other respects. The charm of the author's individuality, and the pleasant ring of the old-fashioned English, are lost. It is highly necessary that the student should recognize this, and should bear in mind that the sole object is to show how the meaning in each case might have been more clearly expressed. Occasionally expressions have been altered, not as being in themselves obscure or objectionable, but as indicating a habit of which beginners should beware. For example, in the extract from Burnet, he is often altered not because, in the particular context, the pronoun presents any obscurity, but because Burnet's habit of repeating he is faulty. These exercises can be used in 2 ways. The pupil may either have his book open and be questioned on the reasons for each alteration, or, after studying the 2 versions, he may have the original version dictated to him, and then he may reproduce the parallel version, or something like it, on paper. Lord Clarendon. The principal faults in this style are long heterogeneous sentences, 43, use of phrases for words, 47a, ambiguous use of pronouns, 5, excessive separation of words grammatically connected together, 19. Original version. Parallel version. 44. It will not be impertinent and now, in order to explain, as nor unnatural to this, 50, far as possible, how so prodigious present discourse, to set down an alteration could take place in this place the present temper so short a time, and how the 19 and constitution of both houses royal power could fall so low as of Parliament, and 34 of the to be unable to support itself. Court itself 30 that 5 it its dignity, or its faithful may be the less wondered at, that servants, it will be of use to set so prodigious an alteration should down here, where it comes most be made in so short a time, and naturally, some account of the 37, the crown fallen so low, that present temper in composition, it could neither support itself not only of both houses of nor its own majesty, nor those Parliament, but also of the court who would, 47a, appear itself faithful to it. Here follows a description of the House of Lords. In the House of Commons were many in the House of Commons persons of wisdom and gravity, who there were many men of wisdom, 7, being possessed of great and in judgment whose high plentiful fortunes, though they position and great wealth disposed were undevoted enough to them, in spite of their indifference court, 19, had all imaginable to the court, to feel duty for the king. An affection a most loyal respect for the to the government established, 47 king, and a great affection for a by law or ancient custom, the ancient constitutional, 43, and without doubt, the major government of the country. Indeed, part of that, 54, body it cannot be doubted that consisted of men who had no mind the majority had no intention to break the peace of the kingdom, or to make any considerable alteration in the government of alteration in church or state. Church or state, 43, and consequently, from the very therefore, 18, all inventions outset, it was necessary to resort were set on foot from the 15, to every conceivable device beginning to work upon, 5, for the purpose of perverting them, and 11, corrupt, 5, this honest majority into rebellion. Them, 43, 45, by suggestions of the dangers 8, which was some, the appeal was threatened all that was precious addressed to their patriotism. To the subject, 19, in there they were warned of the liberty and their property, by dangers that threatened, all overthrowing, 47a, or that was precious in, the liberty overmastering the law, and 47 and property of the subject, a, subjecting it to and if the laws were to be made arbitrary, 47_a_, power, and by subservient to despotism. And countenancing popery to the if popery was to be encouraged subversion of the Protestant to the subversion of the Protestant religion. And then by religion, infusing terrible apprehensions into some, and so working upon the fears of others were appealed their fears 6b. Of 11a too, there was danger. So 21, it being called in question for was said, that they might be somewhat they had done. By which called to account for something, 5, they would stand in need of they had done, and they would then, 5, their protection, and 43, stand in need of the help of those, 45, raising the hopes of others, who were now giving them this, that, by concurring, 47a, timely warning. In others' hopes with 5 them, 5, they were excited, and offices, should be sure to obtain offices honors, and preferments were held in honors and any kind of out as the reward of adhesion. Preferment. Though there were too many were led away by one or many corrupted and misled by these other of these temptations, and several temptations, and 19, indeed some needed no others, 40a, who needed no temptation than their innate other temptations than from the fierceness and barbarity of malice they had contracted against their, 47a, own natures, and the church and the court. But the malice they had contracted leaders of the conspiracy were not against the church and against the many. The flock was large in court, 43, yet the number was not submissive, but the shepherds were great of those in whom the very few. Government of the rest, 47a, was vested, nor were there many who had the absolute authority, 13, to lead, though there were a multitude, 13, that was disposed to follow. 44, 30, Mr. Pym was looked upon of these. Mr. Pym was thought as the man of greatest experience superior to all the rest in parliaments, where he had parliamentary experience. To this, 50, served very long, and was advantage he added habits of always, 50, a man of business acquired from his, 7, being an officer in the continuous service in the Exchequer, 43, and of a good Exchequer. He had also a good reputation generally, 30, though reputation generally, 4, though known to be inclined to the Puritan party, yet not of those Puritan party, yet he was not so furious resolutions against the fanatically set against the church as the other leading men as the other leaders. In this were, and 44, wholly devoted to respect he resembled the Earl of Bedford, who had Bedford, to whom he was nothing of that spirit. Thoroughly devoted. Here follow descriptions of Hampden and St. John. It was generally believed that these three persons, with the three peers mentioned before, were other three lords mentioned united in the closest confidence, before, were of the most intimate, and formed the mainspring of the entire trust with each other, party. Such at least was the and made the engine which, 47 general belief. But it was clear moved all the rest, 30, that they also admitted to their yet it was visible, that, 15, unreserved confidence two others, Nathaniel Fiennes, the second son, 45, whom I will now of the Lord say, and Sir Harry describe, Nathaniel Fiennes, Vane, eldest son to the secretary, second son of Lord Say, and Sir and Treasurer of the House, were Harry Vane, eldest son of the received by them with full secretary, and Treasurer of the confidence, and without reserve. House. The former, being a man of good Nathaniel Fiennes, a man of good parts of learning, and after some parts, was educated at New Year's spent in New College in College, Oxford, where, 22, his Oxford, 43, of which his father family claimed and enjoyed some had been formerly fellow, 43, privileges in virtue of their that family pretending, 23, and kindred to the founder, and enjoying many privileges there, as where, 22, his father had formerly of kin to the founder, 43, 19, been a fellow. He afterwards had spent his time abroad and some time in Geneva and in the Geneva and amongst the cantons of Switzerland, where, 22, Switzerland 30, where he increased that natural improved his disinclination to the antipathy to the church with which milk he had imbibed almost with his been nursed. From his travels he mother's milk, 24, by a singular return through Scotland, 52, coincidence, he came home through, which, 24, few travellers took in Scotland, not a very common route their way home, at the time when for returning travellers, just 5, that rebellion was in bud, when the Scotch rebellion was in, 30, 43, 44, and was very little bud. For some time he was scarcely known, except amongst, 5, that known beyond the narrow and people, which conversed, 47a, exclusive circle of his sect, wholly amongst themselves, until at last he appeared and he was now, 15, found in Parliament. Then, indeed, it was Parliament 30, 43, 44, when quickly discovered that it was quickly discovered that, likely to fulfill even the fond as he was the darling of his hopes of his father and the high father, so, 5, he was like to promise of many years. Make good whatsoever he had for many years promised. 5, the other, Sir H. Vane, was Fiennes' coadjutor, Sir H. Vane, a man of great natural parts, 25, was a man of great natural, 45, and of very profound ability. 25, quick in understanding dissimulation, of a quick and impenetrable in dissembling conception, and of very ready, he could also speak with sharp and weighty expression. He promptness, point, and weight. His had an, 50, unusual aspect, which singular appearance, though it might naturally proceed from his father and mother, parents, who were not noted for either of which were beautiful their beauty, yet impressed men persons, yet, 19, made men think with the belief that he had in him there was somewhat in him of something extraordinary, and 52. His whole impression that was confirmed by life made good that imagination. The whole of his life. His within a very short time after he behavior at Oxford, where he returned from his studies and studied at Magdalen College, was Magdalen College in Oxford, where, not characterized, in spite of the 43, though he was under the care supervision of a very worthy tutor, he lived by a severe morality. Soon not with great exactness, 43, he after leaving Oxford he spent some little time in France, and more in Geneva, and 43, Geneva. After his return into England, he conceived an intense, 38, contracted a full prejudice hatred not only against the and bitterness against the Church, government of the Church, which both against the form of the was disliked by many, but also government and the liturgy, 43, against the liturgy, which was generally held in great and general reverence, 15a. Even with reverence. Many of those who were not friends to 5, the other, in incurring or seeming to incur, by his giddiness, which then much his giddiness, the displeasure of displeased, or seemed to his father, who at that time displeased 43, his father, besides strictly conforming to the who still appeared highly church himself, was very bitter conformable, and exceedingly sharp against nonconformists, the young against those who were not. Vane left his home for New 5. He transported himself into England. New England, 43, a colony within few years before planted by this colony had been planted a few mixture of all religions, 26, which years before by men of all sorts have disposed the professors to dislike religions, and there the government of the Church, who differences, 26, disposed them to 30, 43, 44. Were qualified by dislike the government of the King's Charter to choose their church. Now, it happened that their own government and governors, privilege, accorded by the kings under the obligation, that every charter, of choosing their own man should take the oaths of government and governors was allegiance and supremacy. 30. Subject to this obligation. That 43, 5, which all the first every man should take the oaths of planters did, when they received allegiance and supremacy. These their charter, before the oaths had been taken, not only by transported themselves from hence, all the original planters, nor was there in many years after receiving their charter, before the least scruple amongst them of leaving England, but also for many complying with those obligations, years afterwards, without exciting so far men were, in the infancy the slightest scruple. Indeed, 15, of their schism, from scruples against lawful oaths were refusing to take lawful oaths. Unknown, 27, in the infancy of the 45, he was no sooner landed English schism. But with but his parts made him a rival of Vane. All this was quickly taken notice of, 26, and changed. No sooner had he landed very probably his quality, being then his ability, and perhaps to the eldest son of some extent his position, as eldest privy councillor, might give him son of a privy councillor, some advantage, insomuch, 51, recommended him to notice, and at that, when the next season came the next election he was chosen for the election of their governor. Magistrates, he was chosen their governor, 30, 45, 43, in which in his new post, his restless and place he had so ill fortune, 26, unquiet imagination found, his working and unquiet fancy opportunity for creating and raising and diffusing a thousand conscientious scruples of conscience, which 5 scruples that had not been brought they had not brought over, or ever even heard of by them, nor heard of before, 19 colonists. His government proved that he unsatisfied with failure, and mutually them and they with him, dissatisfied, 45, governed and he retransported himself governor parted. Vane returned into England, 30, 43, 44, to England, but not till he had having sowed such seed of accomplished his mischievous task, dissension there, as grew up to not till he had sown the seeds of prosperously, and miserably those miserable dissensions which divided the poor colony into afterwards grew only to several factions, and divisions prosperously, till they split the persecutions of each. 15a, wretched colony into distinct, other 30, 43, which still hostile, and mutually persecuting continued to the great, 54 factions. His handiwork still prejudice of that plantation, remains, and it is owing to 15, insomuch as some of 5 them, him that some of the colonists, upon the ground of their first on the pretext of liberty of expedition, liberty of conscience, the original cause of have withdrawn themselves from 5, their emigration, have withdrawn their jurisdiction, and obtained themselves from the old colonial other charters from the king, by jurisdiction and have obtained which, 30, 43, in other forms of fresh charters from the king. government, they have enlarged. These men have established new their plantations, within new forms of government, unduly limits adjacent to 15a, enlarged their boundaries, and set the other. Their plantations up rival settlements on the within new limits adjacent to borders of the original colony. 15a, the other. Footnotes. 19. The original metaphor uses the crown as a prop, which seems a confusion. Though the metaphor is so common as scarcely to be regarded as a metaphor, it is better to avoid the appearance of confusion. 20. We sometimes say, briefly but not perhaps idiomatically, the then sovereign, the then temper. And c. 21. The personality of the tempters and organizers of the conspiracy is purposely kept in the background. 22. The relative is retained in the first two cases, because it conveys the reason why Fiennes was educated at New College, and in the third case, because the increased antipathy is regarded as the natural consequence of the residence in Calvinistic Geneva. 23. Claiming. 24. An insinuation of sedition seems intended. 25. This sentence is a preliminary summary of what follows. 26. If which is used here according to Rule 8, the meaning is a, and their differences. If it is used for that, the meaning will be b. All religions that were of a nature to dispose and c. I believe a is the meaning, but I have found difference of opinion on the question. 27. The following words appear to be emphatic, bringing out the difference between the infancy and the development of schism. Burnet. The principal faults in Burnet's style are a. The use of heterogeneous sentences, c. 43, b. The want of suspense, c. 30, c. The ambiguous use of pronouns, c. 5, d. The omission of connecting adverbs and conjunctions, and an excessive use of and, c. 44, and e. An abruptness in passing from one topic to another, c. 45. The correction of these faults necessarily lengthens the altered version. Original version. Parallel version. And his maintaining the honor of. He also gratified the English the nation in all foreign feeling of self-respect by countries gratified the 1. Maintaining the honor of the vanity which is very natural nation in all foreign countries. 50. To Englishmen. 30. 43. Of so jealous was he on this point which he was so 15. 17a. That, though he was not a crowned careful that, though he was not head, he yet secured for his a crowned head, yet his 40a. Ambassadors all the respect that ambassadors had all the respects had been paid to the ambassadors paid them which are 15. Kings of our kings. The king, he said, ambassadors ever had, he said, 6. Received respect simply as the dignity of the crown nation's representative head, was upon the account of the and, since the nation was the nation, of which the king was same, the same respect should, 50, only the representative be paid to the 28 nation's head, so, the nation being the ministers. Same, he would have the same regards paid to 41, his ministers. Another, 29, instance of 5, this the following instance of jealousy pleased him much. Blake with the for the national honor pleased fleet happened, 50, to be at him much. When Blake was at Malaga before he made war upon with his fleet, before his war Spain, 44, and some of his with Spain, it happened that some seamen went ashore, and met the of his sailors going ashore and host carried about, 44, and not meeting the procession of the only paid no respect to it, but host, not only paid no respect to laughed at those who did, 43, it, but even laughed at those who 51, so one of the priests did. Incited by one of the priests put the people upon resenting this to resent the indignity, and they fell upon people fell on the scoffers and 5, them and beat them severely. On their when they returned to the ship the seamen, 5, they complained of this ill usage, and upon that whereupon Blake sent a trumpet to the viceroy to demand the priest who was the instigator of chief, 1, instrument in that the outrage. The viceroy answered ill usage. The viceroy answered that he could not touch him, as he had no authority over the priests. 15 priests, and so could not. To this Blake replied, that he did dispose of him. Blake upon that not intend to inquire to whom the sent him word that he would not authority belong, but if the inquire who had the 1. Power to priest were not sent within 3 send the priest to him, but if ours he would burn the town. That he were not sent within 3 townspeople being in no condition ours, he would burn their town. To resist, the priest was at once, 43, and 5 they, being in no sent. On his arrival, he defended condition to resist him, sent himself, alleging the insolence of the priest to him, 43, 44, who the sailors. But the English, 50, justified himself upon the admiral replied that a complaint petulant behavior of the seamen should have been forwarded to him, and then he would have punished, 44. Blake answered that, if 5. Them severely, for none of his he had sent a complaint to 5. Sailors should be allowed to him of 5. It 5. He would affront the established religion have punished them severely, since of any place where they touched 5. He would not suffer his. But, he added, I take it ill men to affront the established that you should set on your religion of any place at which 5. Countrymen to do my work, for I he touched. But 5. 6. He will have all the world know that took it ill, that he said on the an Englishman is only to be Spaniards to do 5. It, for he punished, by an Englishman. Then would have all the world to know satisfied with having had the 50, that an Englishman was only to be offender at his mercy. Blake punished by an Englishman, 43, entertained him civilly and sent, 44, and so he treated the priest him back civilly, and sent him back, 30, being satisfied that he had him at his mercy. Cromwell was much delighted with 5, this, 43, and read the Blake's conduct. Reading the letters in council with great satisfaction, and said he, 6. Satisfaction, he said, I hope he should make the name of an Englishman as great as ever Englishman, as much respected as that of a Roman, 15a, had ever was the name of Roman been. 44. The states of Holland among other countries the states were in such dread of 5. Him that of Holland were in such dread of they took care to give him no sort Cromwell that they took care to of umbrage. 43, 44. And when give him no sort of umbrage. At any time the king or his accordingly, whenever the king or brothers came to see their sister his brothers came to see the princess royal, 23, within a princess royal their sister, they day or two after, 5, they used were always warned in a day or two to send a deputation to let them by a deputation that Cromwell had required of the states to give the states that, 5, they should them no harborage. Give them no harbor. Cromwell's favorite alliance was the free kingdom of Sweden was Sweden. 30, 44, Carolus Gustavus Cromwell's favorite ally. Not and he lived in great conjunction only under Charles Gustavus, with of councils. 44, even Algernon whom he was on most confidential Sidney, 10a, who was not terms, but also under Christina. Inclined to think or speak well of both these sovereigns had just kings, commended him, 5, to me, notions of public liberty, and said he, 5, had just leased, Algernon Sidney, a man notions of public liberty, 44, certainly not prejudiced in favor, 43, and added, that queen of royalty, assured me this was Christina seemed to have them true of Gustavus. He also held the likewise. But 44, she was same opinion of Queen Christina, much changed from that, when but if so, she was much changed I waited on her at Rome, for when I waited on her at Rome, for she complained of us as a factious she then complained of the factious nation, that did not readily and unruly spirit of our nation comply with the commands, 47a, of our princes. 44, all Italy, no less than trembled at the name of Cromwell, Holland, 31, trembled at the name and seemed under a 1. Panic as of Cromwell, and dreaded him till long as he lived, 43, his fleet he died. Nor durst the Turks scoured the Mediterranean, and the offend the great, 50, protector Turks durst not offend him, but whose fleet scoured the delivered up Hyde, who kept up the Mediterranean, and they even gave character of an ambassador from up Hyde, who for keeping up in the king there, 23, 43, and was Turkey the character of ambassador brought over and executed for 5, from the king, was brought to it. England and executed. 44, 11a. The putting the in another instance of severity brother of the King of Portugal's towards foreigners, the execution ambassador to death for murder, of the brother of the Portuguese was, 11a. Carrying justice ambassador for murder, Cromwell very far, 43, since, though in carry justice very far. 4. The strictness of the law of though in strictness the law of nations, it is only the nations exempts from foreign ambassador's own person that is jurisdiction the ambassador alone, exempted from, 4. Any authority yet in practice the exemption has, 47a. But his masters that extended to the whole of the sends him, yet the practice has ambassadors sweet. Gone in favor of all that the ambassador owned, 47a. To successful abroad, Cromwell was no belonged to him. 41, 44. Cromwell less successful at home and showed his good. 11. Selecting able and worthy men for understanding in nothing more public duties, especially for the then in seeking. 32. Out capable courts of law. In nothing did he and worthy men for all employments show more clearly his great but most particularly for the natural insight, and nothing courts of law. 43, 30a. Contributed more to his popularity. 10a. Which gave a general satisfaction. Footnotes 28. The meaning is his, and therefore the nation's, ministers. There is a kind of antithesis between the nation and the nation's ministers. 29. No instance has yet been mentioned. 30. The thought that is implied, and should be expressed by the words is this: Cromwell's favorite ally was a free country. 31. The remarks about Christina are a digression, and Burnet is now returning to the respect in which Cromwell was held by foreign nations. 32. He not only sought, but sought successfully. That find is not necessarily implied by seek out, seems proved by the use of the word in the authorized version, 2 Tim. 2, 17. He sought me out very diligently, and found me. Bishop Butler. The principal faults in this style are a. A vague use of pronouns, 5, and sometimes b. The use of a phrase, where a word would be enough, 47a. Original version. Parallel version. Some persons, 15. Upon some persons avowedly reject all pretense, 33. Of the sufficiency of revelation as, 34. Essentially the light of nature, avowedly incredible and necessarily reject all revelation as, in its fictitious, on the ground that the 47a. Very notion, light of nature is in itself incredible, and what, 47a. Sufficient. And assuredly, had the must be fictitious. And indeed light of nature been sufficient in, 32, it is certain that no such a sense as to render revelation would have been given, revelation needless or useless, no, 32, had the light of nature been revelation would ever have been sufficient in such a sense as to given. But let any man consider render, 5, 1 not 35, wanting, the spiritual darkness that once or useless. But no, 15b, man in, 41, prevailed in the heathen seriousness and simplicity can world before revelation, and that possibly think it, 5, so, who, 41, still prevails in those considers the state of religion in regions that have not yet received the heathen world before the light of revealed truth, above revelation, and its, 5, present all, let him mark not merely the state in those, 11. Places, 8, natural inattention and ignorance which have borrowed no light of the masses, but also the from. 5. It, particularly, 19. The doubtful language held even by a doubtfulness of some of the, 12. Socrates on even so vital a greatest men concerning things of subject as, 36. The immortality of the utmost, 11. Importance, as the soul, and then can he and well as the 15a. Natural seriousness and sincerity maintain inattention and ignorance of that the light of nature is mankind in general. It is, 34, sufficient? Impossible to say. 12. Who would have been able to have reasoned it is of course impossible to deny out that whole system which we that some second, 36, Aristotle call natural religion, 30, in its might have reasoned out, in its genuine simplicity, clear of genuine simplicity and without superstition. But there is a touch of superstition. There's certainly no ground to affirm whole of that system which we that the generality could call natural religion. But there, 44, if they could, there is certainly no ground for no sort of probability that affirming that this complicated they would. 44. admitting their process would have been possible were, they would highly want it for ordinary men. Even if they had standing admonition to remind them had the power, there is no of 5 it, and inculcated upon probability that they would have them. And further still, were 5 had the inclination, and even if they as much disposed, 47a, we admit the probable inclination, to attend to religion as that they would still need some better sort of men, 15a, are, standing admonition, whereby yet, even upon this supposition, natural religion might be there would be various occasions suggested and inculcated. Still for supernatural instruction and further, even if we suppose these assistants, and the greatest ordinary men to be as attentive to advantages, 50, might be religion as men of a better sort, afforded, 15a, by 5, yet even then there would be them. So that, to say revelation various occasions when is a thing superfluous, what supernatural instruction and there, 47a, was no need of, assistance might be most and what can be of, 47a, no beneficially bestowed. Service is, I think, to talk wildly and at random. Nor would it therefore, to call revelation be more extravagant to affirm that superfluous, needless, and 40a, mankind is so entirely useless, is, in my opinion, to 40a, at ease in the present talk wildly and at random. A man's state, and 40a, life so might as reasonably assert that we completely, 40a, happy, that are so entirely at ease and so, 5, it is a contradiction to completely happy in this present suppose, 40a, our condition life that our condition cannot capable of being in any respect without contradiction be supposed, 47a, better dot, analogy of capable of being in any way religion. Part 2. Chapter 1, Improved. Footnotes. 33 to pretend, once meant. To put forward, maintain. 34, it has been suggested, however, that by, in its very notion incredible, is meant inconceivable. 35, wanting, is used for modern. Wanted. 36, this use of the particular for the general would be out of place in Butler's style, but it adds clearness. Brevity. Sir Archibald Alison. The following extract exhibits examples of tautology and lengthiness. The implied statement, 50, can often be used as a remedy, but more often, the best remedy is omission. Original version. Parallel version. The Russian Empire is, 50, a Russia, with her vast strength and state of, 54, such vast boundless resources, is obviously strength and boundless destined to exercise on the coarse resources, that it is of history a great and lasting obviously destined to make an influence. The slowness of her great and lasting impression on progress only renders her human affairs. Its 50, progress durability more probable. The has been slow, but 5, it 37, is Russian Empire has not, like the only on that account the more empires of Alexander the Great, and likely to be durable. 5, it has Napoleon, been raised to sudden not suddenly risen to greatness, greatness by the genius of like the empire of Alexander and individuals or the accidents of ancient, 19, 31, or that of fortune, but has been slowly Napoleon in modern times, from enlarged and firmly consolidated the force of individual genius, or by well-guided ambition and the accidents of, 54, casual persevering energy, 38, during a fortune, but has slowly advanced, long succession of ages. And 40a, been firmly consolidated, 15, during a succession of ages, from the combined influence of ambition skillfully directed and energy, 15a, perseveringly applied. The extent and fertility of the extent and fertility of her Russian territory are such, 54, territory furnish unparalleled as to furnish facilities for the increase of her increase and elements of strength, population, and power. European which no nation, 47a, in the Russia, that is, Russia to the world enjoys. European west of the Ural Mountains, Russia, that is, Russia to the contains 1,200,000 westward of the Ural 1,000 square geographical mountains, contains 100 miles, or 10 times the surface of 50,400 square Great Britain and Ireland. Marine leagues, or about 1,200,000 square geographical miles, being 10 times the surface of the British Islands, which contain, including Ireland, 122,000. Great part, This vast territory is intersected, no doubt, of this immense, 54, by no mountain ranges, no arid sea below, territory is covered deserts, and though much of it is with forests, or 40a, lies rendered almost unproductive of so far to the north as to be food either by the denseness of almost unproductive of food, but forests, or by the severity of the no ranges of mountains or arid northern winter, yet almost all deserts intersect the vast, 54, except that part which touches sea. Above, extent, and almost the Arctic snows, is capable of the whole, excepting that which yielding something for the use touches the Arctic snows, is of man. Capable of yielding something for the use of man. The 54, the steppes of the south present boundless steppes of the south an inexhaustible pasturage to present, 54, inexhaustible those nomad tribes whose numerous fields of pasturage, and give and incomparable horsemen form the birth to those nomad tribes, in chief defense of the empire. Whose numerous and incomparable horsemen the chief defense of the empire, 39, as of all oriental states, 15a, is to be found. The rich arable lands in the heart, the rich arable lands in the of the 54 empire produce an interior produce grain enough to 2 incalculable quantity of support 4 times the present grain, capable not only of population of the empire, and yet maintaining 4 times 5 its leave a vast surplus to be present inhabitants, but affording transported by the Dnieper. The vast surplus for exportation by Volga, and their tributaries, into the Dnieper, the Volga, and there the Euxine or other seas. Tributary streams, 30, which form so many, 54, natural outlets into the Euxine or other seas, 44, while the cold and lastly, the cold bleak plains, shivering plains which stretching towards Archangel and the shores towards the shores of the White Sea are, 48, covered sea, and covered with immense forests of fir and forests of oak and fir, furnish oak. Furnishing at once, 54, 40, materials for shipbuilding and inexhaustible materials for supplies of fuel that will for shipbuilding and supplies of fuel. Many generations supersede the 54, these ample stores for many necessity of searching for coal. Generations will supersede the necessity of searching in the 14a bowels of the earth for the purposes of 54 warmth or manufacture. Formidable as the power of Russia, much as we may dread Russia for is from the vast extent of its the vastness of her territory, and the great and of her rapidly increasing number of there is greater cause for fear its 54 subjects, 5, it is in the military spirit, and the still more, 5, so from the docility of her people. Military spirit and docile disposition by which they are, 41, distinguished. The prevailing, 54, passion of the burning thirst for conquest as nation is the 54, love of as prevalent a passion in Russia conquest, and this 54, ardent as democratic ambition in the free 54, desire, which 54, burns states of Western Europe. This as 54, fiercely in them as passion is the unseen spring, 2, democratic ambition does in the which, while it retains the free states of Western Europe, is Russians in the strictest the unseen spring, 42, which both discipline, unceasingly impels retains them submissive, 54, their united forces against all under the standard of their adjoining states. Chief and impels their accumulated forces in ceaseless the national energy, which is as violence over all the adjoining great as the national territory, states. The energies of the rarely wastes itself in disputes people, great as, 43, the territory about domestic grievances. For all they inhabit, are rarely wasted in internal evils, how great soever, internal disputes. Domestic the Russians hope to find a grievances, how great soever, are compensation, and more than a 54, overlooked in the thirst for compensation, in the conquest of foreign aggrandizement. 15. In the world. The conquest of the world the people hope to find a compensation, and more than a compensation, 15a, for all the evils of their interior administration. Footnotes 37. Apparently it means not progress, but the Russian Empire. 38. Not energy, but a long succession of ages. Needs to be emphasized. 39. There is nothing in the context that requires the words as of all Oriental states. 40. If they were really inexhaustible, the necessity of searching in the bowels of the earth would be superseded, not for many, but for all generations. 41. The words can be implied, and besides they are expressed in the following sentence. 42. The metaphor is questionable, for a spring, qua spring, does not retain at all, and besides a passion ought not to burn in one line, and be as spring in the next. 43. The meaning appears not to be great as is, i.e., though the territory is great. The end. English Lessons for English People. By the Rev. Edwin Abbott, M.A., Headmaster of the City of London School, and J. R. Seeley, M.A., Professor of Modern History in the University of Cambridge. It is not so much a merit to know English as it is a shame not to know it, and I look upon this knowledge as essential for an Englishman, and not merely for a fine speaker. Adapted from Cicero. Boston, Roberts Brothers. 1883. Illustration, Collegiate Regit. University Press, John Wilson and Son, Cambridge. To the Rev. G. F. W. Mortimer, D.D. Prebendary of St. Paul's Cathedral, late Head Master of the City of London School. Dear Dr. Mortimer, we have other motives, beside the respect and gratitude which must be felt for you by all those of your old pupils who are capable of appreciating the work you did at the City of London School, for asking you to let us dedicate to you a little book which we have entitled English Lessons for English People. Looking back upon our school life, we both feel that among the many educational advantages which we enjoyed under your care, there was none more important than the study of the works of Shakespeare, to which we and our schoolfellows were stimulated by the special prizes of the Beaufoy Endowment. We owe you a debt of gratitude not always owed by pupils to their teachers. Many who have passed into a life of engrossing activity without having been taught at school to use rightly, or to appreciate the right use of, their native tongue, feeling themselves foreigners amid the language of their country, may turn with some point against their teachers the reproach of banished Bolingbroke. My tongue's use is to me no more than an unstringed viol or a harp, or like a cunning instrument cased up, or, being open, put into his hands that knows no touch to tune the harmony. Within my mouth you have engaled my tongue, doubly portcullis with my teeth and lips, and dull, unfeeling, barren ignorance is made my jailer to attend on me. I am too old to fawn upon a nurse, too far in years to be a pupil now. It is our pleasant duty, on the contrary, to thank you for encouraging us to study the cunning instrument of our native tongue. Our sense of the benefits which we derived from this study, and our recollection that the study was at that time optional, and did not affect more than a small number of the pupils, lead us to anticipate that when once the English language and literature become recognized, not as an optional but as a regular part of our educational course, the advantages will be so great as to constitute nothing short of a national benefit. The present seems to be a critical moment for English instruction. The subject has excited much attention of late years. Many schools have already taken it up, others are on the point of doing so. It forms an important part of most government and other examinations. But there is a complaint from many teachers that they cannot teach English for want of textbooks and manuals. And, as the study of English becomes year by year more general, this complaint makes itself more and more distinctly heard. To meet this want we have written the following pages. If we had had more time, we might perhaps have been tempted to aim at producing a more learned and exhaustive book on the subject. But setting aside want of leisure, we feel that a practical textbook, and not a learned or exhaustive treatise, is what is wanted at the present crisis. We feel sure that you will give a kindly welcome to our little book, as an attempt, however imperfect, to hand on the torch which you have handed to us. We beg you also to accept it as a token of our sincere gratitude for more than ordinary kindnesses, and to believe us your affectionate pupils, J. R. Seeley, Edwin Abbott, Messrs. Roberts Brothers Publications. English Lessons for English People. By Rev. A. Abbott, M.A., and Professor J. R. Seeley, M.A. Part 1. Vocabulary. Part 2. Diction. Part 3. Meter. Part 4. Hints on Selection and Arrangement. Appendix 16 MO. Price $1.50. From the London Athenaeum. The object of this book is evidently a practical one. It is intended for ordinary use by a large circle of readers, and though designed principally for boys, may be read with advantage by many of more advanced years. One of the lessons which it professes to teach, to use the right word in the right place, is one which no one should despise. The accomplishment is a rare one, and many of the hints here given are truly admirable. From the Southern Review. The study of language can never be exhausted. Every time it is looked at by a man of real ability and culture, some new phase starts into view. The origin of language, its relations to the mind, its history, its laws, its development, its struggles, its triumphs, its devices, its puzzles, its ethics, everything about it is full of interest. Here is a delightful book, by two men of recognized authority, the head master of London School, and the professor of modern history in the University of Cambridge, the notable author of Ecce Homo. The book is so comprehensive in its scope that it seems almost miscellaneous. It treats of the vocabulary of the English language, diction as appropriate to this or that sort of composition, selection and arguments of topics, meter, and an appendix on logic. All this in less than 300 pages. Within this space so many subjects cannot be treated exhaustively, and no one is, unless we may accept meter, to which about 80 pages are devoted, and about which all seems to be said that is worth saying, possibly more. But on each topic some of the best things are said in a very stimulating way. The student will desire to study more thoroughly the subject into which such pleasant openings are here given, and the best prepared teacher will be thankful for the number of striking illustrations gathered up to his hand. The abundance and freshness of the quotations makes the volume very attractive reading, without reference to its didactic value. Sold by all booksellers. Mailed postpaid by the publishers. Roberts Brothers, Boston. Preface. This book is not intended to supply the place of an English grammar. It presupposes a knowledge of grammar and of English idiom in its readers, and does not address itself to foreigners, but to those who, having already a familiar knowledge of English, need help to write it with taste and exactness. Some degree of knowledge is presumed in the reader. Nevertheless, we do not presume that he possesses so much as to render him incapable of profiting from lessons. Our object is, if possible, not merely to interest, but to teach, to write lessons, not essays, lessons that may perhaps prove interesting to some who have passed beyond the routine of school life, but still lessons, in the strictest sense, adapted for school classes. Aiming at practical utility, the book deals only with those difficulties which, in the course of teaching, we have found to be most common and most serious. For there are many difficulties, even when grammatical accuracy has been attained, in the way of English persons attempting to write and speak correctly. First, there is the cramping restriction of an insufficient vocabulary, not merely a loose and inexact apprehension of many words that are commonly used, and a consequent difficulty in using them accurately, but also a total ignorance of many other words, and an inability to use them at all, and these last are, as a rule, the very words which are absolutely necessary for the comprehension and expression of any thought that deals with something more than the most ordinary concrete notions. There is also a very common inability to appreciate the differences between words that are at all similar. Lastly, where the pupil has studied Latin, and trusts too much for his knowledge of English words to his knowledge of their Latin roots, there is the possibility of misderiving and misunderstanding a word, owing to ignorance of the changes of letters introduced in the process of derivation, and on the other hand, there is the danger of misunderstanding and pedantically misusing words correctly derived from an ignorance of the changes of meaning which a word almost always experiences in passing from one language to another. The result of all this non-understanding or slovenly half-understanding of words is a habit of slovenly reading and slovenly writing, which when once acquired is very hard to shake off. Then, following on the difficulties attending the use of words, there are others attending the choice and arrangement of words. There is the danger of falling into poetic prose, of thinking it necessary to write steed, or charger instead of horse, ire instead of anger, and the like, and every teacher, who has had much experience in looking over examination papers, will admit that this is a danger to which beginners are very liable. Again, there is the temptation to shrink with a senseless fear from using a plain word twice in the same page, and often from using a plain word at all. This unmanly dread of simplicity, and of what is called tautology, gives rise to a patchwork made up of scraps of poetic quotations, unmeaning periphrases, and would-be humorous circumlocutions, a style of all styles perhaps the most objectionable and offensive, which may be known and avoided by the name of fine writing. Lastly, there is the danger of obscurity, a fault which cannot be avoided without extreme care, owing to the uninflected nature of our language. All these difficulties and dangers are quite as real, and require as much attention, and are fit subjects for practical teaching in our schools, quite as much as many points which, at present, receive perhaps an excessive attention in some of our textbooks. To use the right word in the right place is an accomplishment not less valuable than the knowledge of the truth, carefully recorded in most English grammars, and often inflicted as a task upon younger pupils, that the plural of cherub is cherubim, and the feminine of bull is cow. To smooth the reader's way through these difficulties is the object of the first 3 parts of this book. Difficulties connected with vocabulary are considered first. The student is introduced, almost at once, to synonyms. He is taught how to define a word, with and without the aid of its synonyms. He is shown how to eliminate from a word whatever is not essential to its meaning. The processes of definition and elimination are carefully explained, a system or scheme is laid down which he can exactly follow, and examples are subjoined, worked out to illustrate the method which he is to pursue. A system is also given by which the reader may enlarge his vocabulary, and furnish himself easily and naturally with those general or abstract terms which are often misunderstood and misused, and still more often not understood and not used at all. Some information is also given to help the reader to connect words with their roots, and at the same time to caution him against supposing that, because he knows the roots of a word, he necessarily knows the meaning of the word itself. Exercises are interspersed throughout this part which can be worked out with, or without, an English etymological dictionary, 44, as the nature of the case may require. The exercises have not been selected at random. Many of them have been subjected to the practical test of experience, and have been used in class teaching. The second part deals with diction. It attempts to illustrate with some detail the distinction, often ignored by those who are beginning to write English, and sometimes by others also, between the diction of prose and that of poetry. It endeavors to dissipate that excessive and vulgar dread of tautology which, together with a fondness for misplaced pleasantry, gives rise to the vicious style described above. It gives some practical rules for writing a long sentence clearly and impressively, and it also examines the difference between slang, conversation, and written prose. Both for translating from foreign languages into English, and for writing original English composition, these rules have been used in teaching, and we venture to think, with encouraging results. A chapter on simile and metaphor concludes the subject of diction. We have found, in the course of teaching, that a great deal of confusion in speaking and writing, and still more in reading and attempting to understand the works of our classical English authors, arises from the inability to express the literal meaning conveyed in a metaphor. The application of the principle of proportion to the explanation of metaphor has been found to dissipate much of this confusion. The youngest pupils readily learn how to expand a metaphor into its simile, and it is really astonishing to see how many difficulties that perplex young heads, and sometimes old ones too, vanish at once when the key of expansion is applied. More important still, perhaps, is the exactness of thought introduced by this method. The pupil knows that, if he cannot expand a metaphor, he does not understand it. All teachers will admit that to force a pupil to see that he does not understand anything is a great stride of progress. It is difficult to exaggerate the value of a process which makes it impossible for a pupil to delude himself into the belief that he understands when he does not understand. Meter is the subject of the third part. The object of this part, as also, in a great measure, of the chapter just mentioned belonging to the second part, is to enable the pupil to read English poetry with intelligence, interest, and appreciation. To teach any one how to read a verse so as to mark the meter on the one hand, without on the other hand converting the metrical line into a monotonous doggerel, is not so easy a task as might be supposed. Many of the rules stated in this part have been found of practical utility in teaching pupils to hit the mean. Rules and illustrations have therefore been given, and the different kinds of meter and varieties of the same meter have been explained at considerable length. This chapter may seem to some to enter rather too much into detail. We desire, however, to urge as an explanation that in all probability the study of English meter will rapidly assume more importance in English schools. At present, very little is generally taught, and perhaps known, about this subject. In a recent elaborate edition of the works of Pope, the skill of that consummate master of the art of epigrammatic versification is impugned because in one of his lines he suffers to receive the metrical accent. When one of the commonest customs, for it is in no sense a license, of English poets, a custom sanctioned by Shakespeare, Dryden, Milton, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, and Tennyson, can be censured as a fault, and this in a leading edition of a leading poet of our literature, it must be evident that much still remains to be done in teaching English meter. At present this part may seem too detailed. Probably some few years hence, when a knowledge of English meter has become more widely diffused, it will seem not detailed enough. The fourth part, like the chapter on metaphor, is concerned not more with English than with other languages. It treats of the different styles of composition, the appropriate subjects for each, and the arrangement of the subject matter. We hope that this may be of some interest to the general reader, as well as of practical utility in the higher classes of schools. It seems desirable that before pupils begin to write essays, imaginary dialogues, speeches, and poems, they should receive some instruction as to the difference of arrangement in a poem, a speech, a conversation, and an essay. An appendix adds a few hints on some errors in reasoning. This addition may interfere with the symmetry of the book, but if it is found of use, the utility will be ample compensation. In reading literature, pupils are continually meeting instances of false reasoning, which, if passed over without comment, do harm, and if commented upon, require some little basis of knowledge in the pupil to enable him to understand the explanation. Without entering into the details of formal logic, we have found it possible to give pupils some few hints which have appeared to help them. The hints are so elementary, and so few, that they cannot possibly delude the youngest reader into imagining that they are anything more than hints. They may induce him hereafter to study the subject thoroughly in a complete treatise, when he has leisure and opportunity, but in any case, a boy will leave school all the better prepared for the work of life, whatever that work may be, if he knows the meaning of induction, and has been cautioned against the error, post hoc, ergo propter hoc. No lesson, so far as our experience in teaching goes, interests and stimulates pupils more than this, and our experience of debating societies, in the higher forms of schools, forces upon us the conviction that such lessons are not more interesting than necessary. Questions on the different paragraphs have been added at the end of the book, for the purpose of enabling the student to test his knowledge of the contents, and also to serve as home lessons to be prepared by pupils in classes. 45. A desire, expressed by some teachers of experience, that these lessons should be published as soon as possible, has rather accelerated the publication. Some misprints and other inaccuracies may possibly be found in the following pages, in consequence of the short time which has been allowed us for correcting them. Our thanks are due to several friends who have kindly assisted us in this task, and who have also aided us with many valuable and practical suggestions. Among these we desire to mention Mr. Joseph Payne, whose labors on Norman French are well known, Mr. T.G. Philpotts, late Fellow of New College, Oxford, and one of the assistant masters of Rugby School, Mr. Edwin Abbott, headmaster of the Philological School, Mr. Howard Candler, mathematical master of Uppingham School, and the Rev. R. H. Quick, one of the assistant masters of Harrow School. In conclusion, we repeat that we do not wish our book to be regarded as an exhaustive treatise, or as adapted for the use of foreigners. It is intended primarily for boys, but, in the present unsatisfactory state of English education, we entertain a hope that it may possibly be found not unfit for some who have passed the age of boyhood, and in this hope we have ventured to give it the title of English Lessons for English People. Footnotes 44 An etymological dictionary is necessary for pupils studying the first part. Chambers's or Ogilvy's will answer the purpose. 45. Some of the passages quoted to illustrate style are intended to be committed to memory and used as repetition lessons. See pages 180, 181, 212, 237, 238, etc. On the Right Use of Books. A lecture. By William P. Atkinson, Professor of English and History in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. 16 mo. Cloth. Price 50 cents. Full of good sense, sound taste, and quiet humor. It is the easiest thing in the world to waste time over books, which are merely tools of knowledge like any other tools. It is the function of a good book not only to fructify, but to inspire, not only to fill the memory with evanescent treasures, but to enrich the imagination with forms of beauty and goodness which leave a lasting impression on the character. N.Y. Tribune. Contains so many wise suggestions concerning methods in study, and so excellent a summary of the nature and principles of a really liberal education that it well deserves publication for the benefit of the reading public. Though it makes only a slight volume, its quality in thought and style is so admirable that all who are interested in the subject of good education will give to it a prominent and honorable position among the many books upon education which have recently been published. For it takes only a brief reading to perceive that in this single lecture the results of wide experience in teaching and of long study of the true principles of education are generalized and presented in a few pages, each one of which contains so much that it might be easily expanded into an excellent chapter. The Library Table. Reading as a Fine Art. By Ernest Legouve, of the Académie Française. Translated from the 9th edition by Abby Langdon Alger. 16 mo. Cloth. 50 cents. Dedication. To the scholars of the High and Normal School. For you this sketch was written, permit me to dedicate it to you, in fact, to entrust it to your care. Pupils today, tomorrow you will be teachers, tomorrow, generation after generation of youth will pass through your guardian hands. An idea received by you must of necessity reach thousands of minds. Help me, then, to spread abroad the work in which you have some share, and allow me to add to the great pleasure of having numbered you among my hearers the still greater happiness of calling you my assistants. E. Legouve. We commend this valuable little book to the attention of teachers and others interested in the instruction of the pupils of our public schools. It treats of the first steps in reading, learning to read, should we read as we talk, the use and management of the voice, the art of breathing, pronunciation, stuttering, punctuation, readers and speakers, reading as a means of criticism, on reading poetry, and makes a strong claim as to the value of reading aloud, as being the most wholesome of gymnastics, for to strengthen the voice is to strengthen the whole system and develop vocal power. How to parse. An attempt to apply the principles of scholarship to English grammar, with appendixes in analysis, spelling, and punctuation. By Edwin Abbott, M.A., Headmaster of the City of London School. 16 mo. Cloth. Price $1. We recommend this little book to the careful attention of teachers and others interested in instruction. In the hands of an able teacher, the book should help to relieve parsing from the reproach of being the bane of the schoolroom. The etymological glossary of grammatical terms will also supply a long-felt want. N.Y. Nation. How to parse is likely to prove to teachers a valuable, and to scholars an agreeable, substitute for most of the grammars in common use. Boston Daily Advertiser. The Rev. E. A. Abbott, whose books, English Lessons for English People, and How to Write Clearly, have been accepted as standard textbooks on both sides of the ocean, has added another work to his list of sensible treatises on the use of English. It is called How to Parse, and is best described by the further title, An Attempt to Apply the Principles of Scholarship to English Grammar, with appendices on analysis, spelling, and punctuation. The little book is so sensible and so simple that the greater number of its readers will perhaps forget to observe that it is profoundly philosophical also, but it is so in the best sense of the term. N.Y. Evening Post. Of all subjects of study, it may be safely admitted that grammar possesses as a rule the fewest attractions for the youthful mind. to prepare a work capable of imparting a thorough knowledge of this important part of education in an attractive and entertaining form, to many may appear extremely difficult, if not impossible. Nevertheless, the task has been accomplished in a highly successful manner by Edwin Abbott, headmaster of the City of London School, in a neat little volume entitled How to Parse. The author has succeeded admirably in combining with the exercises a vast amount of useful information, which impacts to the principles and rules of the main subject a degree of interest that renders the study as attractive as history or fiction. The value of the book is greatly increased by an excellent glossary of grammatical forms and a nicely arranged index. The work deserves the attention and consideration of teachers and pupils, and will doubtless prove a highly popular addition to the list of school books. N.Y. Graphic. Messrs. Roberts Brothers Publications. Goethe's Hermann and Dorothea. Translated from the German by Ellen Frothingham. With illustrations. Thin 8vo cloth, gilt, beveled boards. Price $2. A cheaper edition, 16mo cloth. Price $1. Miss Frothingham's translation is something to be glad of. It lends itself kindly to perusal, and it presents Goethe's charming poem in the meter of the original. It is not a poem which could be profitably used in an argument for the enlargement of the sphere of woman. It teaches her subjection, indeed, from the lips of a beautiful girl, which are always so fatally convincing, but it has its charm, nevertheless, and will serve at least for an agreeable picture of an age when the ideal woman was a creature around which grew the beauty and comfort and security of home. Atlantic Monthly. The poem itself is bewitching. Of the same meter as Longfellow's Evangeline, its sweet and measured cadences carry the reader onward with a real pleasure, as he becomes more and more absorbed in this descriptive wooing song. It is a sweet volume to read aloud in a select circle of intelligent friends. Providence Press. Miss Frothingham has done a good service, and done it well, in translating this famous idyll, which has been justly called one of the most faultless poems of modern times. Nothing can surpass the simplicity, tenderness, and grace of the original, and these have been well preserved in Miss Frothingham's version. Her success is worthy of the highest praise, and the mere English reader can scarcely fail to read the poem with the same delight with which it has always been read by those familiar with the German. Its charming pictures of domestic life, the strength and delicacy of its characterization, the purity of tone and ardent love of country which breathe through it, must always make it one of the most admired of Goethe's works. Boston Christian Register. Sold everywhere. Mailed postpaid by the publishers. Roberts Brothers, Boston. Dr. Abbott's Works. How to Parse. An attempt to apply the principles of scholarship to English grammar. With appendixes on analysis, spelling, and punctuation. 16mo, cloth. Price $1. How to Tell the Parts of Speech. An Introduction to English Grammar. American edition, revised and enlarged by Professor John G. R. McElroy of the University of Pennsylvania. 16mo, cloth. Price 75 cents. How to Write Clearly. Rules and Exercises in English Composition. 16mo, cloth. Price 60 cents. English Lessons for English People. Jointly by Dr. Abbott and Professor J. R. Seeley, M.A., of Cambridge University and 16mo, cloth. Price $1.50. Roberts Brothers, Publishers. Boston. Transcriber's Notes. Every effort has been made to replicate this text as faithfully as possible, including obsolete and variant spellings and other inconsistencies. The transcriber made the following changes to the text to correct obvious errors. 1. Page 90 impugned. 2. Page 51, to qualify. Enemy. To qualify. Enemy. Text set in bold print is indicated by asterisks, i.e. bold. It is common to have footnotes referenced multiple times in the text. Advertisements for Dr. Abbott's other works published by Roberts Brothers have been moved from the front of the book to the end. End of transcriber's notes.